See, the man didn't even knock twice. Bram Mercer stepped through Mara Whitcomb's door like he owned it because, as he held up the folded document in his gloved hand, he made clear that he already did. See, the foreclosure deed, signed, sealed, her name on it, his money behind it. See, I'm not here to negotiate, he said, eyes cutting past her to the small cabin, to Eli pressed against the far wall, to the old man wrapped in blankets by the fire, his own father, whom this woman had pulled from death's doorway the night before. See, name your price, take your boy, walk away. Mara's hands didn't shake. See, but her jaw tightened. What would you do if the man whose father you just saved came to take everything you had left? See, if this story already has your heart pounding, you're exactly where we want you. See, subscribe to this channel and follow every part of Mara's story to the end, because what happens next will shake you. See, hit that like button and drop your city and country in the comments. See, I want to see how far this story travels. The winter of 1881 arrived in Wyoming like something personal. See, not the slow, creeping cold that settlers could prepare for, the kind that gave you time to stack wood and salt meat and check the rope strung between the barn and the house. See, this cold came fast and mean, dropping from a bruised sky in a single afternoon, turning mud to iron and breath to white smoke before most people had even thought to bring in the last of the pumpkins. See, the kind of cold that killed livestock in their stalls and froze the water in your cup before you finished drinking it. See, Mara Whitcomb had lived through 4 Wyoming winters since marrying Nathaniel. See, she knew what cold felt like, but this one felt different. See, this one felt like a warning. She was 31 years old and already had the hands of a woman 20 years older. See, cracked knuckles, calluses thick as leather at the base of each finger, a small scar along her left palm from a rusted fence wire she'd mended herself the previous spring. See, she didn't think about her hands much. There was too much else to think about. See, the flour barrel in the corner of the kitchen held maybe 12 days of rations if she was careful ate, if Eli kept eating the way 9-year-old boys ate. See, the firewood stack beside the cabin door had shrunk to something that made her stomach tight every time she looked at it. See, she'd been counting logs the way other women counted coins, and the count wasn't good. See, the bank letter sat on the kitchen table because she hadn't been able to make herself move it. See, she'd read it 3 times, then a 4th. The words didn't change. See, $47.60. That was what stood between her and foreclosure. See, the number might as well have been 47,000. See, she didn't have it, couldn't borrow it, and had no means of earning it before the deadline, which was 11 days away, not counting Sundays. See, Nathaniel had been dead 26 months. She hadn't cried in 4 of them. See, not because the grief was gone, but because crying cost something she couldn't afford, some warmth, some steadiness, some sliver of the composure she needed to keep Eli from understanding exactly how close to disaster they were. See, he was smart, her boy. Too smart. He watched her face the way animals watch the sky before a storm, reading things she didn't say out loud. See, so she'd learned to keep her face still. She was doing that now, standing at the window with the bank letter folded in her apron pocket and her eyes on the horizon. See, the storm had been building since midday. By supper time, it was a wall. See, she'd sent Eli to bed early, listening to him argue he always argued, same stubborn streak his father had, and then sat alone by the fire with a cup of weak tea and the sound of wind beginning to push against the shutters. See, she was trying to work out whether she could delay the inevitable by selling the 2 remaining horses. See, if she did, she had no way to get supplies from town. See, if she didn't, she lost the farm and had no need for horses anyway. See, that was the kind of thinking that passed for evening entertainment these days. See, she heard it around 10 o'clock. At first, she thought it was a branch coming down the cottonwood near Nathaniel's grave sometimes shed limbs in high wind. See, but then it came again, and it wasn't a branch. It was too rhythmic. See, too irregular in a human kind of way. Someone was hitting the door. See, she didn't move for a full 3 seconds, which surprised her later when she thought about it. See, she wasn't a cowardly woman. but alone in winter, with a child asleep in the back room, and no neighbors within shouting distance, and a dead bolt that she wasn't entirely sure would hold against a determined man, she stood still for 3 seconds and felt something. Very close to fear before she got her feet moving. She took the fireplace poker with her. That much she wasn't embarrassed about. What she found when she opened the door was not what she'd braced for. He was old 70, maybe older, and he was on his knees in the snow, one hand braced against the doorframe and the other pressed flat against the wood as if he'd been leaning on it for some time. His coat was soaked through, his hat gone, his white hair plastered against his forehead by freezing rain. His lips had gone a color that scared her. He was shaking so hard she could hear it. He looked up at her and said with a kind of dignified effort that struck her even then, "I apologize for the hour." Mara Whitcomb stood there for exactly 1 second. Then she dropped the poker, grabbed him by the arm, and got him inside. His name was Edwin. He told her that much while she stripped his soaked coat and got him near the fire. Edwin Mercer, traveling south from the Laramie Road, his horse spooked by lightning and gone. Him on foot in the dark when the temperature fell and the freezing rain started. He'd seen her lamp. "How long were you walking?" she asked. He thought about it. 2 hours, perhaps 3. She didn't say anything to that. She went and got the last good wool blanket from the chest at the foot of her bed, the one she'd been saving for genuine emergencies, and wrapped it around his shoulders. Then she put water on to boil and cut 2 slices of bread she hadn't been planning to cut until morning. He watched her do it. She noticed him watching, and she didn't like being watched when she was working, so she said without turning around, "Don't thank me yet. You might still die." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. Fair enough. Eli appeared in the doorway of the back room about 20 minutes later, hair sticking up on one side, squinting at the firelight. He looked at the old man, then at his mother, then back at the old man. "Is he dead?" Eli asked. "Not yet," Edwin said. Eli nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer, and came and sat on the floor near the fire to keep the stranger company. Mara watched her son pull his knees to his chest and study this old man with the focused curiosity that children have and most adults lose. And she felt something complicated move through her chest, gratitude that her boy wasn't afraid, and fear, very quiet and constant, about what happened to children when their mothers ran out of options. She went back to the kitchen and tried not to look at the flour barrel. Edwin slept in the chair that night, which wasn't ideal, and woke with a rattling cough that told Mara everything she needed to know about his lungs. He was not going anywhere, not for days. She did the math quickly and without emotion, the way she'd learned to do all arithmetic since Nathaniel died. Extra food, extra firewood, a man too sick to move, and no ability to get word to anyone about where he was. She had 11 days before the bank moved on the property. She had enough firewood to last, she calculated it in her head, while she stood at the stove, perhaps 8 days, if she was conservative. Perhaps 6 if the cold stayed like this. She put more wood on the fire. What else was she going to do? The next 3 days had a particular shape to them that Mara would remember later with strange clarity. Edwin was feverish through most of the first day, not dangerously so, but enough that she kept checking on him every hour, pressing the back of her hand to his forehead the way she used to do for Eli when he was small. He kept apologizing. She kept telling him to stop. On the second day, he was lucid enough to talk, and he talked carefully, the way old men do when they've learned that words have weight. He didn't ask about her circumstances directly. He wasn't the kind of man who pried. But he noticed things she could tell. He was noticing things, and that made her vaguely uncomfortable in a way she couldn't quite explain. He noticed when she gave Eli the larger portion at supper and ate almost nothing herself. He noticed the way she refilled the water pitcher and the way she hesitated before adding a second stick of wood to the fire. He noticed the bank letter she'd moved from the table to the windowsill because she couldn't figure out where else to put it. He didn't comment on any of it. On the third day, he was sitting up properly, color back in his face, and he asked her about the cavalry saber hanging above the fireplace. See, it was Nathaniel's. Most people who came to the cabin didn't ask about it, either because they already knew, or because they could read the particular kind of stillness Mara got around certain objects and knew not to push. See, but Edwin asked directly, and there was something in his voice that wasn't casual curiosity. See, my husband's, she said. She was mending Eli's coat at the table. See, she didn't look up cavalry. Lieutenant, served in the mountain campaigns. See, 73rd. She heard herself say it the way she always said it, clipped, factual, past tense, because past tense was the only tense that applied. See, he died of a lung fever 2 years ago, not in service. See, just here in this bed in February, Edwin was quiet for a moment. See, which campaigns? She looked up then because something in his voice had shifted. See, not pity, she was expert at detecting pity and could shut it down in about 4 seconds. See, this was something else, something like recognition. See, the winter passage. 73, she said. He talked about it sometimes. See, not often. He said it wasn't the kind of thing you talked about much. See, Edwin's hands resting on his knees went very still. See, the Hatcher's Gap crossing, he said slowly. It wasn't a question. See, Mara set down the coat. Yes. How do you know that? See, he looked at the saber for a long time. Then he looked at her with an expression she had never seen on a stranger's face before, a kind of grief and gratitude and something that had no name mixed together in the lines of an old man's face. See, I was in that column, he said quietly. The supply column that got trapped. See, 3 days in that passage, temperature 40 below. See, we were going to die in there. Every one of us knew it. He stopped. See, a young lieutenant came through with 12 men and opened the route. See, let us out, carried 2 of the wounded himself. Another pause. See, I never learned his name. I tried to find it after. See, the records from that campaign were incomplete. See, the fire crackled. Somewhere outside, the wind pushed at the shutters. See, Mara heard herself say, very quietly, Nathaniel never talked about names. See, he said it wasn't about names. Edwin nodded slowly, like a man settling something inside himself. See, no, I don't suppose it was. That was the moment, though neither of them said it out loud, when something shifted in the cabin. See, when the transaction of shelter and warmth became something older and harder to define. See, Edwin sat with it quietly. Mara went back to the coat, but her hands weren't entirely steady, and she made 3 stitches before she realized they were too tight and had to pull them out. See, she didn't cry, but it was close. She was still sitting at that table, the mended coat in her lap, and her thoughts somewhere between grief and something she wasn't ready to call hope when she heard the horses. See, not one horse, several. She went to the window, 6 riders on the ridge. See, coming down. She recognized wealth before she recognized anything else, the quality of the horses, the cut of the lead rider's coat, the deliberate, unhurried pace of men who move through the world expecting it to wait for them. See, the lead rider was not old. He was perhaps 40, broad in the shoulders, riding like someone who learned on good horses and had never been on a bad one. See, she was still watching when Edwin spoke from the chair. See, that's my son, he said. His voice was carefully neutral. See, Mara looked at him. Is that good news or bad news? See, Edwin took a breath. That, he said, depends entirely on Bram. See, she'd heard the name. Everyone in the territory had heard the name. See, Bram Mercer railroads, land contracts, men who made governors nervous. See, she'd heard it the way you hear thunder in the distance, and think, well, that's someone else's problem. See, the riders stopped outside her door. The lead man, Bram, dismounted without hurry, and knocked twice, hard, before she'd even gotten from the window to the door. See, she opened it. He was taller than she'd expected. Dark eyes, sharp-featured, the face that had probably been handsome once before it got used to getting what it wanted. See, he looked at her the way men like him looked at things they were assessing for value, and she felt the full weight of that look and didn't step back. See, Mrs. Whitcomb, he said. That's right, Bram Mercer. He didn't offer his hand. See, I understand you've been sheltering my father. Your father was dying on my porch, she said. See, I brought him inside. Something moved across his face too fast for her to read. See, he glanced past her at Edwin by the fire and seemed to measure something: his father's color, his father's posture, something. See, then he looked back at her. I'm grateful, he said. See, the words were correct, but they were automatic, the way a man says thank you for something he'd have purchased if he'd been given the choice. See, she said nothing. He reached into his coat and produced a folded envelope. See, he held it out to her. For your trouble and for your time. See, I understand you're facing some financial difficulty with this property. He said it without any particular inflection, which was somehow worse than if he'd said it with malice. See, this should resolve that, and then some. Inside the envelope was a bank draft. See, she could see the figure when she unfolded it, and she went very still. See, that's considerably more than the property is worth, she said. See, yes, he agreed, I want it quick and I want it clean. See, my surveyors arrive in 10 days. I need this valley cleared. See, the word cleared. She held the draft for another second, looking at the number that would have solved every problem she had, bought a house in town, put Eli through school, given her 3 years without fear. See, the number that would have changed everything. Then she folded it and held it back out to him. See, no, she said. Bram Mercer looked at the draft in her outstretched hand. See, then he looked at her face. Then slowly he took it back. See, Mrs. Whitcomb, he said, and for the first time there was something underneath the politeness. You should understand your position. See, the bank holds a foreclosure notice on this property. See, it's a matter of days. If you refuse my offer, I purchase the deed from the bank instead. See, the outcome for you is identical except you walk away with nothing. See, he let that sit in the air. Mara looked at him steadily. See, then I suppose we'll find out which one of us is more stubborn. See, she stepped back and opened the door wider, not in welcome. See, in the specific way that says, this conversation is finished, and you may leave now. See, Bram Mercer looked at her one more time, that same measuring look, recalibrating something, and then he turned and walked back out into the cold. See, he didn't take his men and leave. He set up camp on the ridge, and when Mara looked out the window an hour later, she could see the glow of their fire against the evening sky, patient and steady and not going anywhere. See, Edwin spoke from his chair. I'm sorry, Mara. She turned. See, it was the first time he'd used her name. Don't be. See, you didn't do this. He's not a cruel man, Edwin said, and there was something in his voice that sounded like a father still trying to believe something about his son. See, he learned hard lessons young. He's convinced himself that everything can be bought or outlasted. See, what changed, she asked. Not sarcastically, genuinely. See, Edwin looked at the fire a long time. I haven't figured out yet whether anything has. He paused. See, but he came himself. He could have sent men. Mara thought about that. See, then she went to the window and looked at the fire on the ridge and thought about 11 days and 8 days of firewood and a bank notice and a grave under a cottonwood tree directly in the path of a railroad that moved everything it encountered. See, she thought about Nathaniel, about the way he used to stand at that same window in the early mornings, coffee cup in hand, looking at the valley like it was something he couldn't believe was his. See, she thought about the saber on the wall, about Edwin's face when she'd said the words Hatcher's Gap. See, she wasn't ready to see the shape of what she was thinking yet. See, but it was there, somewhere in the back of her mind, taking form in the dark. See, she went to put more wood on the fire. Eli was still awake. She could hear him, the specific restless creak of his bed that meant he was lying there, thinking instead of sleeping. See, she went and stood in his doorway. Is that man going to take our house? Eli asked. See, he was looking at the ceiling. She leaned against the door frame. See, I don't know yet. Is he the old man's son? Yes. See, Eli was quiet for a moment. He didn't come in to see him. See, Mara hadn't thought about that, but Eli was right. See, Bram had stood at the door and looked past her at his father and then looked away. See, had not come in, had not asked how Edwin was, had not crossed the threshold to put a hand on the old man's shoulder. See? No, she said, he didn't. Eli turned his head to look at her in the doorway. See? Why? I don't know, she said. And then, because she'd promised herself she would never lie to her son about things that mattered, sometimes people forget how. See? She pulled his door, mostly closed, and stood in the hallway for a moment in the dark, listening to the wind and the creak of the cabin and the distant sound of men camping on her ridge. See? Something was coming. She didn't know yet what shape it would take. See? But she was still standing in her own house, in the home Nathaniel had built with his hands, beside the grave of the man who had once carried wounded soldiers out of a frozen mountain pass, because leaving them wasn't something he was able to do. See? And she was her husband's wife. That still meant something. See? She went back to the kitchen, sat down at the table, and began to think. See? She sat at that table for a long time after Eli's breathing finally evened out into sleep. See? The fire had burned down to a low, steady pulse of orange and red, and the cabin had taken on that particular stillness that only comes deep in a winter night, not peaceful exactly, more like the world holding its breath. See? Edwin was asleep in the chair again, his head tipped slightly to one side, the good wool blanket pulled up to his chest. See? His breathing had a roughness to it still, a catch at the top of each inhale that told her his lungs weren't finished fighting whatever the cold had put into them. See? Mara had a stub of candle on the table and a piece of paper she'd torn from the back of Eli's arithmetic primer. She'd apologize for that later, and she was writing numbers. See? Not because she believed the numbers would give her an answer she didn't already have, but because she needed to see them laid out plainly, the way you sometimes need to look directly at a wound instead of just feeling it hurt. See? $47.60 owed to the bank. See? 11 days remaining on the notice. 2 horses, worth maybe $30 combined if she found a good buyer, which she wouldn't in 11 days in winter. See? Firewood for perhaps 7 days at current burn. 5 if the cold held. See? Flour enough for 10 days if she cut portions. 8 if Eli kept growing the way he'd been growing, which he would, because children grew whether you could afford it or not. See? She looked at the numbers for a long time. Then she turned the paper over so she didn't have to look at them anymore. See? Outside on the ridge, Bram Mercer's campfire still burned. See? She checked twice in the last hour. He hadn't moved. See? He wasn't going to move. Men like that understood one fundamental thing about leverage, that time worked in their favor when they were patient enough to let it. See? She understood that too. She just didn't have the luxury of patience. See? She was still sitting there when Edwin spoke. You should sleep. See? She looked up. His eyes were open, watching her from across the dim cabin with that particular stillness of old men who've learned to observe without making a production of it. See? I thought you were asleep, she said. I was. See? He shifted slightly in the chair. See? Wincing at something his back. See, probably, or his hip. See? Then I wasn't. This chair has opinions. Despite everything, she almost smiled. See? It was Nathaniel's. He built it himself. He was good at many things. See? Chairs weren't one of them. Edwin looked at the chair beneath him with a sort of rueful appreciation. See? He was thorough, at least. This thing will outlast us both. He paused. See? How bad is it? She didn't pretend not to know what he meant. See? Bad enough. The mortgage. The mortgage. The firewood. See? The flour. She said it plainly, without asking for anything from him, because she wasn't. See? I've been trying to work out which problem to solve first, but they're all the same problem. See? Edwin was quiet for a moment. The fire shifted and popped. See, my son, he started. Don't, she said, not harshly. See? Just clearly. I know what you're going to say. That he's reasonable. See? That if I talk to him properly, explain things. See? That there's a version of this where everybody walks away satisfied. She looked at him steadily. See? There isn't. I know what he wants. He wants this valley because it saves him money and time. See? He doesn't want what he wants to cost him anything, and talking won't change the arithmetic on his end any more than it changes mine. See? Edwin didn't argue with that. He looked at his hands in his lap. See? He wasn't always like this. I know, Mara said, and she did, In the abstract way, you know things about strangers from the shapes their actions make. See, something made him this way. Something usually does. See, his mother died when he was 12, Edwin said. It wasn't an excuse. His voice made clear he wasn't offering it as one. See, just a fact. I traveled a great deal. The railroad work before I had money enough to send other men. See, Bram raised himself, mostly. I told myself he was fine because he seemed fine. He paused. See, he wasn't fine. He was just very good at seeming so. See, Mara looked at him. She thought about Eli in the back room. See, about the very specific work of teaching a child to be steady when the ground under you was anything but. See, about how easy it would be, in a different kind of grief, in a different kind of desperate circumstance, to let that steadiness curdle into something harder. See, she didn't say any of that. Instead, she said, "Get some sleep, Edwin." See, you're still sick. So are you, he said, just of a different kind. See, she didn't have an answer for that. She blew out the candle and sat in the firelight until her eyes grew heavy. See, she slept in the chair across from Edwin, which she hadn't meant to do. See, she woke with a stiff neck and gray light coming through the gaps in the shutters and the immediate pressing awareness that the fire had gone very low. See, she got up and added wood before she did anything else, before she put water on, before she checked on Eli, before she thought about the ridge. See, instinct by now. Keep the fire alive. Everything else comes after. See, Eli was already awake when she pushed his door open, sitting on the edge of his bed with his boots on, which meant he'd been listening for a while and decided that being dressed was safer than being caught still in bed if something was happening. See, he was like his father that way, not fearless, but very committed to not appearing afraid. See, is the man still up there, he asked. Probably, she said. See, get your coat. He did, and he followed her to the window, and they stood together looking up at the ridge, where the remains of Bram's campfire smoked thinly against the white sky. See, 6 horses still picketed in a line, a couple of figures moving around. See, yes, still there. What does he want? Eli asked. He'd asked this before last night, but he was asking again because the answer Mara had given the valley, the railroad, the straight route through the mountains hadn't fully satisfied him. See, 9-year-olds understood possession the way adults sometimes forgot they once did. See, this is mine. That is yours. The concept of a corporation purchasing a grief-soaked homestead through legal procedure was beyond him, and Mara was grateful for that. See, he wants our home, she said, because it was true, and because Eli deserved the truth even when it was sharp. See, and he thinks he can have it, can he? She looked at her son's face. See, serious, brown-eyed, with a small scar above his left eyebrow from a fall out of the cottonwood tree the previous summer that had scared her badly and not frightened him at all. See, not if I can help it, she said. See, Eli nodded, satisfied with this, in the way that children are satisfied when an adult tells them the exact truth without softening it, because children can usually tell the difference, and they trust the truth even when it's frightening. See, Edwin was awake and sitting up by the time she'd gotten breakfast, started a thin porridge which she made thicker than usual because Edwin needed the calories. And Eli was a growing boy, and her own hunger was the most negotiable thing in the cabin. See, Edwin ate without comment on the quantity, which she appreciated. See, men who commented on the quantity of food when they were guests in circumstances like hers were men who hadn't thought carefully enough about what being a guest actually meant. See, they were nearly finished eating when the knock came. See, 3 knocks this time. Deliberate, spaced. The knock of a man who expected to be heard on the first one and knocked again out of formality rather than uncertainty. See, Mara set her spoon down, wiped her hands on her apron. See, stewed. Edwin said very quietly, Mara. She looked at him. See, be careful with what you say, he said. Not because you're wrong. See, because he's looking for a reason to stop feeling guilty, and giving him one by accident would be very easy. See, she took that in, nodded once, went to the door. Bram Mercer in daylight was not quite the same proposition as Bram Mercer in the blue dark of a winter evening. See, he was still everything she'd read the night before: the authority in his posture, the quality of his coat, The face that had stopped being uncertain about things sometime in his late 20s and hadn't started again. See, but there were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before, or that she hadn't noticed, and his jaw held the particular tension of a man who'd been trying to sleep on frozen ground and had not entirely succeeded. See, he had one of his men behind him, big, quiet, the kind of man whose job was to stand behind other men and look capable of things. See, but Bram himself had left the others on the ridge. See, that was something Edwin had said, that he'd come himself. Good morning, Bram said. May I come in? The please was absent. See, but the may I was there, and she supposed that was something too. See, she stepped aside. He came in, and she watched him register Edwin by the fire, his father's face, his father's color, the wool blanket, and the rough chair, and the signs of a 3-day illness, tended by someone with no reason to tend it. See, something moved across Bram's face too fast to name. See, he looked at Edwin for a moment, and Edwin looked back at him with the careful neutrality of a father who has long since learned that expressing worry only makes his son armor up faster. See, you look better, Bram said. I am better, Edwin said. See, thanks to this woman. Bram nodded. He turned to Mara. See, she'd stayed standing, which was deliberate. She wasn't going to sit down and invite him to settle in as if this were a social call. See, he seemed to understand that because he stayed standing too. See, I want to be honest with you, Mrs. Whitcomb, he said. See, that would be a change, she said, and then regretted the sharpness of it, not because he didn't deserve it, but because Edwin had just told her not to give him a reason to stop feeling guilty. See, she adjusted. Go ahead. He reached into his coat and produced the bank draft again, but this time he set it on her kitchen table rather than holding it out to her. See, a different posture entirely. Less command, more negotiation. See, the offer stands, he said. See, but I want to explain the context, because I don't think I was clear yesterday. He paused, and she could see him choosing words with the precision of a man who had made a lot of offers and understood that the framing mattered. See, my railroad is going through this valley. See, not because I'm indifferent to what the valley means to you, to what it meant to your husband, but because the alternative route adds 3 months of construction and an amount of money that affects not just my company, but the men who work for it. See, 600 men, Mrs. Whitcomb, their wages, their families. See, the railroad can't stop for sentiment. It never could. See, Mara looked at the draft on her table. 600 men, she repeated. See, yes, and 1 woman, she said, and 1 boy, and a man who doesn't have a grave yet, but will. She looked up at him. See, do those numbers balance? Something in Bram's jaw tightened. See, that's not how decisions of this scale are made. See, I know it isn't, she said. I'm asking if they should be. See, he didn't answer that. He moved slightly, not a step back, not quite, but a shift in weight that she read as discomfort. See, the bank deadline is in 10 days. I've already been in contact with the lender. See, if you refuse this offer and the bank forecloses, I purchase the deed. See, the outcome for you, she said. Yes. See, you told me that last night. Then you understand your position. See, I understand mine, she said. I'm wondering if you fully understand yours. See, that stopped him. Not because she'd said anything threatening. She had nothing to threaten with, and they both knew it, but because the confidence in her voice was not the confidence of a bluffing woman. See, it was the voice of someone who had something they hadn't yet shown, and Bram Mercer was a man who'd built his fortune on reading rooms and reading people, and whatever he read in her face made him still. See, my position, he said slowly. Your father, she said, almost died on my porch 3 nights ago. See, not because he was careless, because Wyoming in January is not survivable on foot in a freezing rain, and his horse was gone, and my lamp was the only light he could find. She kept her voice even. See, he was sitting in that chair running a fever for 2 days, while I burned firewood. I cannot replace and fed him from stores I cannot restock. See, I did that because there was no other option a person could live with. She paused. See, now I want to know what kind of man you are, not what kind of businessman. See, what kind of man? Bram looked at her for a long, measured moment. See, Mrs. Whitcomb, he said, and his voice had shifted into something quieter, though not softer exactly, more like a man consciously choosing to lower a weapon he hasn't decided not to use. I appreciate what you did for my father. See, genuinely. That's why I made you a generous offer instead of simply waiting for the bank. See, that's not generosity, she said, that's efficiency. See, the silence that followed that sentence was the longest kind, the kind where the air in the room changes slightly, where both people are aware that something has been said that can't be unsaid, and the only question is what comes next. See, Edwin, from his chair by the fire, said nothing. He was watching his son's face the way a doctor watches a fever, not interfering, just tracking. See, Bram picked up the bank draft from the table. He didn't put it away, didn't hold it out to her again. See, just held it, looking at it, the way a man looks at a card he'd been sure was unbeatable and is now not so certain about. See, what do you want? He said finally. Not the rehearsed, offer-tabling version of the question he'd asked the night before. See, something more stripped down, more direct. Mara had been thinking about this since 3 a.m, when the numbers on the back of Eli's arithmetic paper had refused to add up to any answer except the one she'd been avoiding. See, I want time, she said. Give me a week. Don't bring your surveyors. See, don't talk to the bank. Just give me a week to think. See, he studied her. Why? Because I'm not ready to give you an answer yet. See, and because I think there's something you don't know yet either. She looked at Edwin briefly. See, something that might change the shape of this conversation. See, Bram followed her glance to his father. Edwin held his gaze without expression. See, whatever passed between them in that look was old and private and not for Mara to read. See, Bram turned back to her. 1 week, he said. I'll pull my men off the ridge. See, my surveyors arrive in 9 days regardless. If I don't have an answer before then. See, you'll have one, she said. He nodded once, pocketed the draft. See, turned toward the door. See, then he stopped. See, with his hand not quite on the latch. See, and turned his head toward the fire. See, toward Edwin. See, and for the first time since he'd walked in, the businessman's control slipped just enough to show something underneath it, something uncertain, almost young. See, Are you well enough to travel? He asked Edwin. See, when my men, I'll tell you when I'm ready to travel, Edwin said mildly. See, same as I always have. Bram's mouth pressed into a thin line that might, on a less guarded face, have been something sadder. See, yes, he said, same as always, he left. See, Mara stood at the window and watched him go back up toward the ridge, and she watched his men begin breaking camp with the efficient, practiced movements of people who'd done it many times before. And within 20 minutes, the ridge was clear. See, just snow and rock and pale winter sky, and the distant dark line of the mountains against it. See, she turned around. Edwin was watching her. You have something in mind, he said. See, it wasn't a question. Maybe, she said. Tell me more about Hatcher's Gap. See, and so he did. He talked for the better part of an hour. See, with the fire rebuilt, and Eli sent outside to split the remaining wood, a task that would take him most of the morning and keep him occupied and away from a conversation that Mara needed to hear without a 9-year-old's interjections. See, Edwin talked slowly with the deliberate pacing of a man revisiting something he'd set aside for years. See, not buried, you couldn't bury something like that, but set aside, in the way that people set aside experiences too large to carry constantly. See, it had been January of 1863. Edwin was younger then, running supply for the Territorial Army, overseeing a column of 34 men and enough ammunition and provisions to keep 3 remote outposts stocked through the winter. See, the Hatcher's Gap crossing was the last and worst stretch, a narrow passage through the high rock, barely wide enough for 2 horses abreast, sheer walls on either side, and the temperature dropping every hour. See, they'd gone in expecting to be through by nightfall. See, they were not through by nightfall. A section of the trail had collapsed under the weight of ice, and they couldn't go forward, and the entrance behind them was already drifting with new snow, and going back was just dying slower. See, 3 days. He described it without dramatizing it, which was somehow worse than dramatizing it would have been. See, the frostbite on the fingers of his left hand, two of which he'd eventually lost to the surgeon's knife. See, the way the horses started dying first, one by one, and nobody talked about what that meant because everyone already knew. See, the way men stopped making contact around the second day because looking at another person's face and seeing how close they were to finished was worse than just staring at the ice in front of you. See, and then on the third morning, the sound, voices. See, coming from above and ahead, from a direction that shouldn't have had voices in it. See, and then a young lieutenant appearing around a bend in the passage that everyone had agreed was impassable. See, leading 12 men and carrying ropes and iron spikes, and what Edwin could only describe as the absolute settled certainty of a man who had decided that the word impassable simply hadn't applied to him. See, Nathaniel Whitcomb. He hadn't known the name then. See, he'd only known the face young, windburned, a cut above his right eye from where he'd slipped on the ascent, and the voice, calm and specific. See, giving instructions to the trapped men with the efficiency of someone who'd already thought through every part of it. See, speeches, no reassurance. See, just, here's what we're doing. See, here's how you hold the rope. See, here's who goes first. See, Edwin was one of the last out. His hands were so bad by then that he couldn't grip the rope properly, and Nathaniel had come back, personally after the others were out, and helped him through the final section himself. See, had said, as far as Edwin could remember, almost nothing. See, just kept his hand on Edwin's arm and moved forward and didn't stop. See, I tried to find him afterward, Edwin said, to say whatever it is you say. See, but the campaign records were incomplete. They moved units around so quickly in those years. See, I looked for a while, and then I suppose I stopped looking. See, Mara was very still. She'd heard some of this. Nathaniel had told her pieces of it over the years, always minimizing, always focused on the other men rather than himself. See, she'd never heard it from the other direction. She'd never heard it as a thing that had been received rather than given. See, he never talked about it as a rescue, she said. He said he just found a route and some men needed it. See, Edwin smiled at that, a small, tired smile. That sounds right. See, she stood up and went to the fireplace and stood looking at the cavalry saber. See, it wasn't a decorative thing, it was too old and too used for that. See, there were marks on the scabbard, small dents and scratches that told you it had been carried in real conditions, not hung on walls. See, Nathaniel had kept it clean, though, right up until he couldn't anymore. See, she reached up and took it down. It was heavier than it looked. See, it always surprised her, the weight of it. She held it for a moment, the way you hold something that belonged to someone you loved, not using it, just feeling it, the particular physicality of a thing that they'd touched. See, then she set it carefully on the kitchen table, alongside the arithmetic paper with its useless numbers. See, Edwin, she said, does your son know anything about what you just told me? See, he considered that. Bram knows I was in that campaign. See, he knows I survived Hatcher's Gap. He was very young when I came home, 8, 9 years old. See, I wasn't much for explaining things to him then. See, I was trying to get the feeling back in my hand and run a business and not fall apart, and children's questions are hard to answer when the answers are as big as that. He paused. See, so no. He knows the outline, not the inside of it. See, Mara looked at the saber. She was thinking hard, the way you think when you can feel the edges of an idea but can't see the whole shape yet. See, if he knew, she said slowly, would it matter to him? See, Edwin was quiet for a long moment. Outside, she could hear the rhythmic crack and thud of Eli working through the woodpile, steady and determined in the cold. See, I don't know, Edwin said honestly. The boy I raised would have wept to hear it. See, the man he became, he stopped. I don't know who that man is, entirely. See, I thought I did. I don't. He looked at his hands. See, he came himself. I keep coming back to that. Mara picked up the arithmetic paper and turned it over again, looking at the numbers. See, then she picked up the pencil and beneath them wrote 2 words. See, she looked at those 2 words for a long time. See, then she set the pencil down, squared her shoulders, and began to think in earnest not about what she was afraid of, Not about the firewood or the flour or the bank notice, but about what she actually had. See, what she could use, what ground she was standing on, even if it was frozen solid and had other men's footprints on it. See, she had a name, she had a story. See, she had a saber on her kitchen table and an old man by her fire who had never forgotten a face, and a debt that had been owed for 18 years and never collected, and a son sleeping in the next room who needed her to be smarter than she felt. See, and she had 7 days. She was not going to waste them feeling sorry for herself, or frightened or small. See, she could feel sorry for herself after. She'd done it before and she could do it again, and there would probably be more occasions for it in the years ahead. See, but not now. She thought about what Edwin had said about Bram. See, he learned hard lessons young. He convinced himself everything can be bought or outlasted. See, she thought about what it made out of a boy when he had to decide that the world was either yours to control or something that controlled you. See, and how there wasn't room in that framework for things like debt and gratitude and the weight of one man carrying another through ice. See, she wasn't planning to appeal to Bram Mercer's kindness. See, she had no evidence yet that he had any to appeal to. See, she was planning something more specific than that. See, 7 days was enough time to find out whether the man he'd become still remembered how to be the boy he'd been, the one who might understand if he saw the right evidence that there were obligations older and heavier than money. See, and that some of them had been resting on his family's name for longer than he knew. See, she thought about Nathaniel's grave out beneath the cottonwood. See, she thought about what it meant that Bram's railroad would run directly over it if she did nothing. See, she thought about a young man on a frozen mountainside, coming back for the last man in the passage, even though the others were already safe. See, Nathaniel hadn't turned back then, and Mara was not turning back now. See, Eli came in from the woodpile at midday, red-cheeked and breathing hard, and dropped a substantial armload beside the door with the particular satisfaction of a boy who'd done real work and knew it. See, more out there, he said. Not a lot more, but some. See, good, she said. Come eat. He sat across from Edwin and ate his porridge without complaint, which was notable because 9-year-olds had opinions about porridge and usually expressed them. See, Edwin told him something about horses a story, some adventure from his younger years, clearly being edited for a child's audience in ways that made Edwin's eyes occasionally do something private and distant. See, Eli listened with total attention, his spoon forgotten halfway to his mouth. See, Mara watched them. The old man and her boy, sitting across from each other in the cabin her husband had built, beside the fire she was nursing through its last available fuel. See, with a railroad magnate's campsite recently vacated on the ridge above them, and a cavalry saber on her kitchen table, and 7 days to do something that might not be possible. See, she felt something move in her chest that wasn't quite hope. It was too early for hope, and hope had been expensive lately. See, but it was something adjacent to it, something that felt like purpose, which was almost better. See, she squared her shoulders and started planning. The 7 days passed the way hard time always passes, not quickly, not slowly, but with a grinding specificity that made every hour feel accounted for. See, Mara used each one. The morning after Bram pulled his men from the ridge, she sat down with Edwin at the kitchen table and went through everything she had that could be documented. See, not stories, not memories, documents. The cavalry commission paper folded so many times the creases had gone soft. See, the discharge record she'd kept in the cedar box under the bed alongside Nathaniel's watch, and a lock of his hair that she never looked at directly, because looking at it directly still cost her something she couldn't afford. See, the letter of commendation from his commanding officer, written in a formal hand on paper that had gone the color of old tea. See, 3 field dispatches that Nathaniel had kept without explanation, as soldiers sometimes kept things without being able to say exactly why. See, Edwin went through them with the slow care of a man handling evidence. See, which is what they were. He read the commendation twice, his lips barely moving. See, when he got to the 3rd dispatch, a terse, See, military account of the Hatcher's Gap operation, filed by an officer named Carver. 3 days after the event, he set it down on the table and pressed his palm flat against it and didn't say anything for a while. See, that's Carver's account, he said finally. Wallace Carver. See, he was my second. He died the following year at a river crossing near the Powder. He looked up. See, this document names your husband by rank and action. See, it names the passage opened and the men extracted. His voice was steady. See, the kind of steady that takes work. This is not a story, Mara. See, this is military record. This is proof. She nodded. See, she'd known that. She'd needed to hear him say it. See, would Bram accept it as such, she asked. Edwin thought about that. See, Bram accepts evidence. That's one of the things about him that's actually admirable, whatever else you want to say. See, he doesn't. He doesn't dismiss documentation to protect his own comfort. See, he never has. He turned the paper over in his hands. See, whether evidence changes what he does is a different question. See, Mara took the dispatch back carefully and set it with the others. See, that's the question I'm working on. The next 3 days she spent in a kind of preparation she couldn't have fully explained to anyone, because it wasn't only practical. See, she cleaned the cabin, not because Bram Mercer deserved to come back to a clean cabin, but because Nathaniel had kept it clean, and she'd let things slide in the worst of the winter, and that bothered her. See, she repaired the shutter on the south window that had been letting in cold air since November. See, she went over Nathaniel's papers again, alone this time, when Eli was asleep and Edwin was resting, and let herself do the thing she hadn't done in 4 months, which was sit with her grief instead of running it on a tight leash. See, it was not comfortable. Grief without a leash rarely is. See, she sat at the table with the commendation letter in her hands and let herself think about the man who had earned it. See, not the symbol, not the soldier. Nathaniel, who burned his coffee every single morning and never learned why, who sang badly and didn't know it, who wept at the wrong moments at a hawk circling in a blue sky, at the first snow of the season. See, at Eli learning to write his own name and never wept at the things most men wept at, which she'd always found strange, and then gradually had come to understand. See, he'd already used up whatever capacity he had for weeping on the mountains. See, the small beautiful things caught him off guard because the terrible things no longer could. See, she missed him with an exhaustion that was different from the acute early grief. See, that had been sharp. This was just constant, like a stone in your boot that you'd stop noticing exactly, but that changed how you walked. See, she put the papers away and went to bed and slept better than she had in weeks, which surprised her. See, on the 4th day, Edwin was well enough to walk outside. See, not far, not for long, but the color in his face was real now, and the cough had largely gone, and he moved with something closer to his natural bearing, which was, she'd come to understand, considerable. See, he was a man who'd built things. You could see it in the way he stood, the way he looked at a landscape as something to be understood rather than simply observed. See, he walked with her to Nathaniel's grave. It was under the cottonwood, as it always was. See, marked by a flat piece of granite that Mara had gotten the blacksmith to engrave the previous spring, because the wooden cross she'd put up right after had begun to rot and the thought of Nathaniel's name. See, disappearing into rot was more than she could accept. See, the stone said his name, his dates, his rank, and a line from something he'd said to her once that she'd never forgotten. A man is what he does when no one's watching. See, he'd said it about something small, some small honesty, some minor act of keeping a promise to himself when it would have been easy not to. See, he hadn't meant it as a creed, but it was. Edwin stood at the grave for a long time without speaking. See, Mara stood beside him and didn't try to fill the silence. See, the cottonwood's bare branches were doing their winter thing against the sky, skeletal and very still in the cold air. See, Nathaniel had planted that tree the first year they were here, because he said a homestead needed a tree that was older than the buildings, and if you couldn't find one, you had to start one. See, the tree was 11 years old and already enough to have opinions about the weather. See, the proposed route, Edwin said eventually. Where exactly does it run? See, Mara pointed, across the far corner of the property, through the lower pasture, clipping the edge of the small rise where the cottonwood stood. See, probably she'd estimated from what the surveyors had left when they'd passed through in autumn, marking trees she'd had to remove the ribbons from, 'cause looking at them made her sick within 30 feet of where they were standing. See, Edwin looked at the grave, then at the proposed path. See, then back at the grave. He can't have known, Edwin said quietly. See, when he routed it through here, he can't have known. See, no, she agreed. He didn't, but he knows now, Edwin said. See, he knows there's a grave. He knows it's Nathaniel's. See, he doesn't know. She stopped, corrected herself. He doesn't feel it yet. See, he knows it the way you know facts, not the way you know things that cost you something. See, Edwin turned to look at her. You want to make him feel it. See, I want to show him, she said carefully, that this isn't sentiment versus progress. See, this is a specific debt, with a specific face on it. She looked at the grave marker. See, Nathaniel's name is already carved in stone. I'd like it to count for something, while there's still time for it to count. See, Edwin was quiet. The cold settled around them, particular and serious. See, he'll come back on the 7th day, Edwin said. He said 9 days for the surveyors, but he'll come back before that. See, he won't be able to help it. He said it with the certainty of a man who knew his son's impatience underneath the surface control. See, he'll want to know what you're thinking. He'll come back at day 7 and call it courtesy. See, I know, Mara said. And what will you do? She looked at the grave one more time. See, at Nathaniel's name in the stone, at the dates that bracketed too short a life and said nothing about the shape of it. See, I'm going to ask him to come here, she said, to this spot. See, and then I'm going to let the evidence speak. And then I'm going to ask him for something he has no legal or practical obligation to give me, and no power on earth can force him to give me, and that will be the whole thing. See, either he's the kind of man who can hear it or he isn't. See, and if he isn't, she breathed out slowly, then I'll know. See, and I'll figure out what's left. It wasn't hope. It was something colder than hope and more reliable, a plan with clear terms, clear evidence, and a clean understanding of what she was actually asking for and what it would cost if the answer was no. See, Edwin nodded. He looked at the grave once more, and then at the mountains beyond it, their peaks white and certain against a sky that had gone the specific pale blue of deep winter. See, he's a better man than he lets himself be, Edwin said. See, I believe that. I don't know if it's a father talking. He glanced at her. See, I genuinely don't know. I know, she said. That's what the next 3 days are for. See, she was right about the timing. Day 7 arrived in the form of a single rider coming down from the North Road at mid-morning, and it was Bram, alone this time, no men behind him, which was different. See, she watched him come through the window while she finished washing the breakfast dishes, and she dried her hands carefully and went to the door and opened it before he knocked. See, he pulled up short. He hadn't expected that, Mrs. See, Whitcomb, he said. Come in, she said. There's coffee. See, he dismounted, tied the horse to the post, and came in. See, he stood in her kitchen with his hat in his hand and accepted the coffee she handed him and looked around the cabin with a different quality of attention than he'd had on his previous 2 visits, less assessment, more observation. See, she noticed him noticing things. Edwin's chair, the saber on the wall. See, the cedar box she'd left on the table closed. Edwin was by the fire. See, he and Bram exchanged a nod that contained approximately 15 years of complicated history compressed into a single gesture. See, Eli was at the back of the cabin doing his letters, and he looked up at Bram with the direct, measuring stare of a child who has decided this person is not yet to be trusted and is reserving judgment. See, Bram looked at Eli. Something shifted briefly in his face there and gone. See, he looks like him, Bram said quietly. He clearly hadn't meant to say it out loud. See, Mara looked at her son and then back at Bram. Yes. See, Bram looked down at his coffee. He stopped. See, started again. My surveyors arrive in 2 days. I wanted to give you the time I promised, but I also need to know where things stand. See, then let me show you, she said. She went to the table and opened the cedar box. See, she didn't make a performance of it. She just laid out Nathaniel's papers one by one, the way you'd lay out evidence at a hearing factual ordered without narration. See, the commission, the discharge record, the commendation letter. See, and last the Carver dispatch. Bram set down his coffee and looked at the papers. See, he didn't touch them at first. He read the commendation from where he stood, leaning slightly forward, and she watched his eyes move across the lines of it. See, then he reached out and picked up the Carver dispatch, the way his father had, and read it through. See, the kitchen was very quiet. The fire ticked and settled. See, Hatcher's Gap, he said. He said it the way you say a thing when you're connecting it to something you already know. See, your father was in that column, Mara said. The supply column that was trapped. See, 34 men, 3 days in that passage. She kept her voice even. See, my husband led the team that got them out. He went back for the last man personally. She paused. See, the last man was Edwin. Bram's eyes went to his father. See, Edwin sat quietly, meeting his son's gaze without either confirmation or theater. See, he'd already decided he wasn't going to perform this for Bram. See, he was going to let Bram find his own way to it. You knew, Bram said to him. See, it wasn't an accusation, just a realization moving across his face. See, I found out 3 days after I arrived here, Edwin said. See, when she told me her husband's regiment and I asked about the campaigns. See, Bram looked back at the dispatch in his hand. He read it again. See, she could see him reading it again, his eyes moving over the same paragraph twice, which told her something was catching there. See, he's named here, Bram said. Yes, First Lieutenant Nathaniel Whitcomb. See, 73rd Cavalry. He opened the passage and extracted 34 men from... He stopped reading aloud. See, kept reading silently. Set the paper down carefully, the way you set down something that has more weight than you expected. See, the silence stretched. This is why you refused the offer, he said finally. See, partly, she said. The other part is that this is my home, and my husband is buried here, and no sum of money changes that. See, but yes, partly, he picked up his coffee again. He needed something to do with his hands, she could see that. See, he stood at her kitchen table, holding a tin coffee cup and looking at a cavalry dispatch, and she watched him work through it, watched the businessman in him try to locate this new information on the map he'd already made of the situation, and find that it didn't fit where he'd expected. See, Mrs. Whitcomb, he said, I want to be. He stopped. See, started again. I understand what you're telling me. See, I understand that your husband saved my father's life 18 years ago, and that you saved his life last week, and that there is a... He paused. See, a symmetry here, a moral weight to it. I'm not dismissing that. See, but she said, he looked at her. The railroad's route is set. See, the engineering is done. My contract with the territorial government specifies this valley. See, going around is possible, she said quietly. He blinked. See, what? Going around is possible. You know it's possible because your engineers already surveyed the ridge route. See, they didn't choose it because it costs more and takes longer. See, but possible and prohibitive aren't the same thing. She held his eyes. See, I'm not asking you to lose money, Mr. Mercer. I'm asking you whether there's a price you're willing to pay for what this is worth. See, his jaw tightened. You're asking me to reroute a railroad. See, I'm asking you, she said, to decide what a man's life is worth. See, what the life of the man who saved your father is worth. See, what that life's grave is worth. She reached out and touched the edge of the Carver dispatch without picking it up. See, your father came home from Hatcher's Gap because Nathaniel Whitcomb went back for him. See, you exist because Nathaniel Whitcomb went back for him. See, I'm not asking for a favor. I'm asking you to recognize a debt that your family has been carrying since 1863 and has never paid. See, the word debt landed differently than gratitude would have. See, she'd chosen it deliberately. Bram Mercer operated in the language of obligation. See, he understood accounts. He understood balance and what it meant when a ledger had an entry on one side with nothing on the other. See, she watched him feel that. He didn't speak for a long moment. See, he set the coffee down and looked at the papers on the table, And then he looked at the saber on the wall, and she could see something moving behind his face that he was working hard to keep from showing. See, what exactly are you asking for? He said. His voice was careful. See, more careful than it had been. Specifically, this was the moment she'd been building to for 7 days. See, she was ready for it. Erase my mortgage, she said. See, completely. Whatever agreement you've reached with the bank, whatever you've purchased or arranged, clear it. See, the farm is mine, free and clear. She held up one finger. See, second, the cabin stands. Your railroad does not come within 200 yards of this property line. She held up a second finger. See, third, Nathaniel's grave is protected, in writing, legally, as a condition of whatever land arrangement you make with the territory. A third finger. See, and fourth, the route goes around the valley, through the granite ridge if that's what the engineering requires. See, your men blast through the rock and the railroad bends. See, the room was so quiet she could hear Eli's pencil scratching at his letters in the back room. See, Bram stared at her. He stopped. Impossible, she offered. See, I was going to say extraordinary, he said. You're asking me to absorb months of delays, and you understand what blasting through granite costs? He pulled himself back. See, took a breath. You're asking me for a fortune. I'm asking you, she said, for what your father's life was worth to you. See, you decide the number, not me. She watched that hit him. See, it hit him the way she'd meant it to, not as a financial argument, which he could have deflected, but as a personal one, which he couldn't, at least not cleanly. See, because the moment you put a dollar value on your father's survival, you've already conceded the entire principle of the argument. See, his jaw worked. He looked at Edwin. Edwin said nothing. See, he was watching his son with an expression that was equal parts love and grief, and the particular helplessness of a parent who has finally run out of things to give a child except the truth about who that child actually is. See, I need to see the grave, Bram said abruptly. Mara looked at him. See, what? The grave, your husband's grave. He picked up his hat from the table. See, I need to see it. Before I say anything else. She studied him for a moment, looking for the strategy in it, the way you look for the angle when a man like Bram Mercer asks for something that seems uncharacteristic. See, she didn't find one. What she found instead was something that looked, improbably, like a man who needed to make something real that was currently still only paper. See, all right, she said. She got her coat. See, she looked at Edwin. See, who gave her the smallest nod go. See, the nod said, see, I'll stay here. See, she went to the back room and told Eli to keep at his letters, ignoring his expression of supreme skepticism at being asked to do schoolwork while interesting things were happening. See, then she led Bram Mercer out the back of the cabin and across the hard frozen ground toward the cottonwood. See, they walked in silence. The cold was sharp but not vicious today, the sky a pale clear blue without a cloud in it, the kind of winter day that almost convinced you spring was coming if you didn't look too closely at the thermometer. See, their breath came in white puffs. The ground was frozen solid underfoot, every footstep a hard report. See, the cottonwood was bare and enormous against the sky. See, the granite marker was visible from 20 feet away, the engraved letters dark against the pale stone. See, Bram stopped a few feet back and read it. She didn't watch his face. See, she looked at the stone herself, at Nathaniel's name and the dates, at the line she'd chosen because it was his and it was true. See, a man is what he does when no one's watching. The silence went on for what felt like a very long time. See, January 3rd. See, 1,000. See, 863. See, Bram said quietly. See, he wasn't reading from the stone, he was reading from somewhere inside himself. See, my father came home in early February that year. He'd lost 2 fingers. See, he never fully explained to me how. He just said he stopped. See, Mara waited. He said some things you get to keep and some things you have to give, Bram said. See, I was 9 years old. I thought he meant the fingers. See, I thought he was talking about the fingers. His voice had lost the boardroom quality entirely. See, what was underneath it was not what she'd expected. See, it was younger, rougher at the edges. I never asked him what he meant. See, I was 9 and I was glad he was home, and then he left again 6 weeks later for the next contract and he stopped himself. See, this is not relevant. It is, she said. He looked at her. See, it's exactly relevant, she said, because what your father gave at Hatcher's Gap wasn't just the fingers. See, and what Nathaniel gave out of that passage wasn't just a rescue. She looked at the grave. See, men carry things from those places, things that cost them for the rest of their lives. See, Nathaniel had nights, years of nights, when whatever happened in that passage came back to him, and he couldn't sleep, and I'd find him sitting in the dark. She kept her voice level. See, he never complained about it. He paid the cost of it quietly for the rest of his short life. See, and the men he brought out of there went home and lived. See, they built things, they had children. She paused. See, you're here. Bram looked down at the grave marker. See, she watched him, this large, controlled, expensive man, standing in the frozen January air beside the grave of someone he'd never met, whose existence he'd never known about. See, whose sacrifice had made his own existence possible in a chain of causation he was only now, at 40 years old, being asked to fully consider. See, his hand came up and he touched the edge of the granite marker. See, not dramatically. Just put his hand on it, the way you touch something to make it real. See, the route through the ridge, he said. His voice was different now. See, still controlled, but from a different place in him. See, my engineers estimated. I'm not negotiating the engineering, she said. See, that's your problem to solve. I'm asking whether you're the kind of man who solves it. See, he pulled his hand back from the stone, looked at her. See, you're not afraid of me at all, he said. It wasn't what she'd expected him to say. See, she took a breath. I'm afraid of plenty of things, she said. See, losing this farm, not being able to feed my son, the bank. See, winter. She paused. You? No, not especially. I've been more afraid of quieter things. See, something in his face changed. Not softened. Bram Mercer's face didn't soften easily. She thought it had been a long time since it had known how. See, but something in it reorganized, shifted to a different arrangement, and what emerged wasn't exactly warmth, but it was something adjacent to honesty. See, I already bought the foreclosure deed, he said. She went still. See, 3 days ago, he said. I contacted your bank the morning after our first conversation. See, I hold the foreclosure note on this property. He said it looking directly at her, not away, which she recognized later as being important that he didn't look away. See, I could take this farm without your consent, legally. See, today, the cold seemed to deepen around her. See, she stood very still in it and looked at him and understood in the space of a breath that everything she'd built toward in 7 days, the evidence, the argument, the careful architecture of obligation could come apart right here, right now. See, on this patch of frozen ground next to her husband's grave, if this man decided that was what he wanted. See, she didn't move. Yes, she said, you could. He reached into his coat. See, she watched him do it with a steadiness she was genuinely surprised to find she still had. See, he produced the document, folded, official, real, her name on it. See, his money behind it. He held it for a moment. See, then, standing beside Nathaniel Whitcomb's grave, beneath the bare branches of the cottonwood in the clear, cold January air, Bram Mercer took the foreclosure deed in both hands and tore it down the middle. See, then he tore it again. The pieces scattered in a slight wind and landed in the snow around the grave marker, white paper against white ground, and were still. See, Mara stood there and breathed. Bram looked at the torn paper. See, then at her. His face was not the face of a man who'd made a brilliant strategic decision. See, it was the face of a man who'd done something he wasn't entirely sure about, something that had cost him considerably more than the monetary value suggested, and who was standing with the weight of it and not running from it. See, the railroad goes around the valley, he said. His voice was quiet and completely certain. See, I'll deal with the engineering. I'll talk to my foreman today. He looked back at the grave. See, the route through the granite ridge, it'll cost months, and it'll cost money, and that's... He stopped. See, that's how it is. Mara realized she was holding her breath. See, she let it out. Your mortgage, he said, is gone. See, I'll have the release drawn up and recorded at the county seat by the end of the week. He finally looked at her directly, and what she saw in his face then was something she hadn't seen there before, not guilt exactly, but a kind of recognition. See, like a man who'd looked into a room he'd been avoiding for a long time and found it smaller than he'd feared and more important than he'd admitted. See, the grave is protected. I'll have my lawyer draft a territorial covenant. See, no railroad infrastructure within 300 yards of this marker. See, binding on any future sale or transfer of the adjacent land. See, she said, 300 yards. 300, he confirmed. See, I'm adding 100. They stood there for a moment, the two of them, on opposite sides of the grave in the winter light. See why, she asked. Not challenging him, genuinely asking. See, he looked at Nathaniel's name one more time, at the line carved in stone. See, a man is what he does when no one's watching. See, because, Bram said slowly, as if he was working it out as he said it, I have been making decisions for 20 years under the assumption that everything has a price and everything can wait, and eventually everything yields. He paused. See, and I walked up to this grave with the deed to this property in my pocket, and I read what's written on that stone, and I thought he stopped. See, his jaw worked. I thought about being 9 years old and having a father who came home when plenty of men's fathers didn't. See, and about not knowing, for 30 years, the specific name of the reason why. See, he looked at her. My father's life had a name, he said. See, I'd like to make sure the name survives. Mara looked at him for a long moment. See, not forgiving him, there was a timeline of pressure and threat and the purchase of her foreclosure deed that she wasn't going to forget in the next 5 minutes. See, but understanding him, which was different and in some ways more complicated. See, she nodded. He nodded back. They walked back to the cabin in the particular quiet of people who have just rearranged something between them that cannot be rearranged again. See, overhead, the cottonwood's branches moved slightly in a cold current of air, and Nathaniel's grave rested beneath them in the frozen ground. See, and the torn pieces of the foreclosure deed caught in the snow around the stone and lay there, still and white until the next wind took them. See, inside the cabin, Edwin looked up when they came through the door. See, he looked at his son's face, then at Mara's. He asked no questions. See, he simply reached out and set his hand on the table in front of the empty chair across from him, and after a moment, Bram Mercer sat down in it. See, Eli came in from the back room, apparently having decided that letters could wait, and stood in the doorway looking at this large stranger sitting at his family's table. See, are you staying for supper? Eli asked. Bram looked at the boy. See, at the brown eyes that were very much his father's. See, if your mother allows it, he said. Mara was already at the stove. See, there's stew, she said. It's not much. It's enough, Edwin said, with the specific warmth of a man who meant something larger than the stew and knew everyone in the room understood that. See, Mara stirred the pot and listened to the fire and to the sounds of a conversation beginning tentatively at her kitchen table between a father and a son who'd been talking around each other for years. See, and she thought about Nathaniel not with the usual stone-in-the-boot ache, but with something warmer, something that felt almost like he was present in it. See, in the strange particular way that the people we love are present in the things they set in motion long after they're gone. See, she didn't say anything about that. She just stirred the stew and let the warmth build in the cabin and waited for whatever came next. See, the stew was thin and the bread was the last of what Mara had been rationing, and nobody at the table mentioned either of those things. See, that in itself was remarkable, she thought, standing at the stove and ladling out 4 portions with the deliberate fairness of a woman who'd been dividing insufficient food for months. See, 4 people around a table that had rarely seen more than 2. See, Eli had appointed himself across from Bram with the focused attention of a boy who'd decided this person required close monitoring. See, Edwin sat at the end, eating slowly the way men eat when they're tired but want to be present for something. See, and Bram Mercer, railroad magnate, land contractor, man who made territorial governors uncomfortable. Sat in Nathaniel Whitcomb's chair and ate thin stew without comment, and occasionally looked at the cavalry saber above the fireplace with an expression Mara couldn't entirely read. Nobody spoke much for the first few minutes. That was all right. Some meals were like that, the food doing the work of putting people in the same place long enough for something else to happen. It was Eli who broke the silence, because Eli always broke silences that went on too long, having inherited his father's discomfort with rooms full of things people weren't saying. How many men work for you? He asked Bram. Bram looked at the boy. For the railroad, about 600 on the current project. More elsewhere. Eli considered this. Do you know all their names? No, Bram said. He said it without apology, but also without dismissal. Just the plain fact of it. My pa knew everyone's name, Eli said. In his unit, all 12 men. He said it, not as an accusation. His voice held none of that, but as information he was offering, a data point in his ongoing assessment of this stranger. He said that was the first thing a good officer did. Learned the names. Bram set down his spoon. He looked at Eli with a quality of attention that was different from how he'd looked at the boy before, less distant, more direct. That's good advice, he said. He gave a lot of good advice, Eli said. Ma wrote some of it down, Eli, Mara said, not sharply. Just a gentle redirect. But Bram said, what did she write down? Eli looked at his mother, got no prohibition, and looked back at Bram. Stuff like a man who makes a promise owns that promise until it's paid. And you can tell a person's character by what they do when the doing costs them something. He recited these with the particular cadence of a child who has memorized things without fully knowing why, only knowing they mattered. And the one on the grave. About what you do when no one's watching. The table was quiet. Bram picked up his spoon again. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, to nobody in particular, my father used to say that the railroad was going to connect the country. That once you could move people and goods across the territory in days instead of months, everything else would follow: schools, commerce, medicine, opportunity. He paused. He believed that when it was true and kept believing it after it got complicated. Edwin said from the end of the table, I still believe it. I know you do, Bram said. Something in his voice, not quite warmth, but the place where warmth used to be and might still visit occasionally. What I lost track of, Bram said slowly, was the difference between the railroad serving people and people serving the railroad. He wasn't looking at anyone. He was looking at the table in front of him, at the grain of the worn wood. At some point those switched places, and I didn't. I noticed, and I told myself it was necessary. That scale required it, that you couldn't build something large enough to matter without accepting that some smaller things would be lost. He looked up at Mara. I told myself that about this valley. She met his eyes. I know you did. I was wrong, he said. 2 words. No elaboration, no qualification around them to soften the landing. She respected that about it, that he said it plainly and let it be plain. Eli was watching Bram with his chin in his hand, elbow on the table, the way he watched things he was trying to figure out. Are you sorry? He asked. Mara started. It's a fair question, Bram said. He looked at the boy. Yes, I'm sorry. Not because it was bad business. The route through the valley would have been cheaper and faster, and any businessman would have chosen it. I'm sorry because he stopped, worked at something. Because I came here knowing there was a woman and a child and a grave, and I treated all 3 of those things as problems to be managed. And they weren't problems, they were just people. People in their home. Eli stared at him for a moment. Okay, Eli said, and picked up his spoon and went back to eating with the simple finality of a child who has heard a satisfactory answer and is ready to move on. Edwin made a sound that might have been the beginning of a laugh, quickly suppressed. Mara turned back to the stove so no one could see her face. After supper, she washed the dishes while Bram and Edwin sat by the fire. Eli dragged his blanket out from the back room and settled on the floor between them, With his back against his grandfather's chair, he'd started calling Edwin grandfather sometime around day 4. See, without asking permission or announcing the decision, simply doing it the way children do things they feel, are obviously correct, and fell asleep within 20 minutes with the boneless completeness that only children achieve. See, Mara dried the last bowl and hung the cloth, and stood at the edge of the room watching. See, the fire was low and steady, and the three of them, the old man, the sleeping boy, the man in the middle, who was neither, made a tableau that she hadn't expected and couldn't have described exactly. See, except that it had something to do with what families look like at the edges of their best and worst moments, when all the performance falls away and what's left is just people in firelight. See, Bram was talking to his father, not the controlled, modulated speech he used for transactions. See, something quieter. She caught pieces of it, not listening deliberately, but the cabin was small and the night was quiet. See, you should have told me, Bram said. Low, not angry. See, something more complicated than angry. I tried, Edwin said. See, when you were young I tried. You were somewhere else by then. See, already building your walls. I was 12. I know you were 12. See, Bram was quiet for a moment. You could have told me when I was 30. See, you would have filed it away, Edwin said gently. See, under things that don't affect current operations. He paused. See, I needed you to find it yourself. I just didn't know it would take this. See, another silence. The fire shifted. The foreman is going to hate me, Bram said. See, he already does, Edwin said. You once made him reroute a water line because it was 6 inches off the survey mark. See, it was 8 inches, Bram said, and it mattered. See, everything matters to you, Edwin said. That's not the problem. See, the problem is that some things matter more than others, and you stopped knowing how to tell the difference. See, Mara moved quietly into the kitchen, giving them what privacy the small space allowed. See, she sat at the table and looked at the cedar box, still open, Nathaniel's papers arranged inside it. See, she touched the edge of the carver, dispatched the document that had started all of this, the dry military language that contained, if you knew how to read it, see, the shape of a life and the moment it had crossed another life, and neither man had known it until now, 18 years too late, and one of them in the ground. See, she thought about Nathaniel, about what he would make of all this. See, he'd been a practical man, not a sentimental one. He'd have approved of the argument she'd made, would have called it sound, would have said she'd used the available resources intelligently. See, he'd have been uncomfortable with the honor of it, with the weight of what his name had come to mean to other people. See, he'd been genuinely puzzled, always, by the idea that ordinary choices in hard circumstances could be considered courage. See, I just did what was in front of me, he used to say. See, as if that explained it, as if what was in front of most people wasn't exactly the same, and yet they turned away from it daily. See, she missed him with a steadiness that had nothing dramatic in it anymore. See, it was just there, the way weather was there, not always the same, not always as bad, but constant in its nature. See, she heard Bram's chair scrape back, heard him move through the cabin. See, he appeared in the kitchen doorway, and she looked up. See, I'll ride to the ridge camp tonight, he said. Talk to my foreman first thing. He paused. See, there'll be some noise about the new route, questions. See, people who'll say I've lost my sense, have you? She asked. See, probably, he said. He said it without self-pity. See, my accountant will have opinions. My partners will have questions. See, the territorial contract will need to be amended, which means government lawyers, which means exhaled. See, it means months of headaches before the blasting even starts. See, she looked at him. Are you telling me this so I'll feel guilty, or so I'll understand what you're agreeing to? See, the second one, he said, without hesitation, I don't want your guilt. See, I want you to understand that I know what this costs, and I'm choosing it anyway. See, I want you to know it's not a casual thing. See, she nodded. I know it's not. He picked up his hat from the peg by the door. See, then he stopped with his hand on the latch and turned back. See, the mortgage release, he said. I'll have my lawyer ride out with it before the week is out. See, you'll want to read it before you sign anything. Have someone you trust read it too. See, I'll read it myself, she said. He looked at her for a moment. See, yes, he said. I imagine you will. He started to go again. See, stopped again. She was beginning to recognize this as a quality of his, the man who was efficient in all large things and had difficulty with small gestures, with the personal kind that didn't fit neatly into strategy. See, I'll send supplies tomorrow, he said. Flour, meat. See, wood if your stores are they're low, she said before he could make it a question. See, she wasn't too proud to say that. There was a difference between pride and stubbornness, and she'd worked out which one she could afford. See, I won't say no to flour. He nodded. It's not charity. See, I know what it is, she said. He held her eyes for a moment. See, he stopped, reconsidered, started differently. See, your husband was fortunate, he said finally, to have someone like you. See, Mara looked at him steadily. He was, I also was. Those things can both be true. See, something in Bram's face moved just briefly. Then he said, Good night, Mrs. See, Whitcomb, and went out into the cold. She stood at the window and watched him ride up toward the ridge, his lantern a small moving point of light against the dark, until the darkness swallowed it. See, behind her, Edwin said from the doorway between the rooms, He's going to be all right. See, I know, she said. I mean in the broader sense, Edwin said. See, not just tonight. He's going to be paused. He found his way back to something tonight. See, I haven't seen him find his way back to something in a very long time. See, Mara turned from the window. When did he lose it? See, Edwin looked down at Eli, still asleep on the floor in his blanket, and the expression on his face was the particular expression of a parent reckoning with the costs of their own absences. See, when his mother died, he said, I was grieving too. See, he stopped. I thought grief was something you moved through and came out the other side of. See, I didn't understand that children need someone to move through it with them, or they just stop moving. He looked up. See, he stopped. He built everything around the place where he stopped. See, very impressive buildings, very solid walls, a pause. See, very lonely. Mara was quiet. She thought about Eli, sleeping on the floor, brown-eyed and stubborn and full of his father's most specific qualities. See, she thought about what it would mean to him if she disappeared into grief, the way Edwin was describing, not physically but inwardly, just going somewhere her child couldn't follow. See, she'd been close some nights, closer than she'd ever told anyone. See, thank you for telling me that, she said. Edwin shook his head. See, thank you for being someone he could actually see. See, he's been looking through people for years. I don't know what you have that made the glass crack, but he half smiled. See, I'm glad of it. She picked up Eli's blanket from the floor. He'd kicked it half off and tucked it back around him. See, he stirred and muttered something that wasn't a word and went back under. See, bed, she said to Edwin. You're still recovering. See, I'm fine, Edwin. He went to bed. Mara sat alone at the kitchen table for a while after that, in the silence of a cabin that felt different from the silences of the previous weeks. See, not lighter. She wasn't naive enough to think one evening resolved anything in any permanent way. See, the mortgage release wasn't signed yet. The route change wasn't surveyed. See, Bram Mercer had made promises that he'd made in good faith, but that she'd need to see on paper before she let herself breathe entirely. See, she was not a woman who confused a good conversation with a done deal. See, but something had shifted. The specific quality of the fear that had been sitting on her chest for months, the fear that had no solution, that was just the fact of her situation that had changed shape. See, it was still there. It was just no longer shapeless. See, the following morning arrived gray and cold, and with it came two of Bram's men from the ridge camp, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies. See, they were polite in the careful way of men who'd been given specific instructions about how to behave. See, and they stacked the flour sacks and the meat and the firewood beside the cabin door without ceremony, and touched their hats to Mara and rode back up the ridge without asking for anything. See, Eli stood on the porch and watched them go. He really did it, Eli said. See, he said he would, Mara said. People say things, Eli said. See, he was 9 years old and already knew that, which made her chest ache in the complicated way that the wisdom of children always did. See, yes, she said, they do. And then you watch what they do afterward. See, Eli thought about this. So we're watching, she confirmed. See, Edwin came out onto the porch and stood with them in the cold air, looking at the woodpile that was now considerably larger than it had been the day before. See, he looked at it with a satisfaction that was personal rather than strategic, the satisfaction of a man who'd spent 3 days being cared for in these conditions and knew exactly what that woodpile had meant when it was smaller. See, he keeps his word, Edwin said. Whatever else. He always keeps his word. See, Mara filed that away. The week that followed had a different rhythm from the weeks before it. See, the immediate catastrophe had lifted, not solved, not sealed, but lifted, and in its absence, Mara found herself capable of thinking past the next 3 days for the first time in months, which was its own strange feeling. See, like standing up after being crouched for so long you'd forgotten what full height felt like. See, she got the cabin into proper order. She organized the papers in the cedar box, wrapped the Carver dispatch separately in oilcloth because it was the most fragile and the most important. See, she began to think about spring, not distantly, not in the abstract, but specifically. See, what she wanted to plant, whether she could save enough from the current supplies to put money toward a third horse come spring, which would let Eli ride to town for school starting in September. See, he was too bright to keep teaching from her own patchy knowledge, which covered arithmetic, and letters, and history, and absolutely nothing about science or literature or any of the things he was going to need. See, she caught herself planning the way she used to plan, in Nathaniel's time, when the future was a place you went deliberately rather than a thing that just happened to you. See, it surprised her each time, like an unexpected muscle memory. See, Bram came back on the 4th day after supper, and this time he didn't knock the commanding knock of a man conducting business. See, he knocked the way Edwin had taught Eli to knock 3 times, moderate, the knock of someone who is a guest and knows it. See, she opened the door. He was alone again. He'd been riding. See, he had mud on his boots, and the look of a man who'd been out on the land all day, arguing with topography and losing, which she recognized because Nathaniel had come home looking like that fairly regularly. See, the new route is surveyed, he said without preamble. See, he came in and stood in the kitchen rather than the main room, which by now felt like his natural position in the house, close enough to participate, far enough to not presume. See, my chief engineer thinks I've gone insane. He expressed this view clearly and at length. See, what did you tell him? Mara asked. I told him to survey the ridge and figure out the approach angles, Bram said. See, he did. Reluctantly. He came back this morning with a workable plan. A pause. See, he's good at his job. He doesn't like me right now, but he's good at his job. See, good engineers probably shouldn't always like their employers, she said. See, means someone's being honest. Bram looked at her with that recalibrating expression she'd come to recognize. See, like a man who keeps encountering things he hadn't calculated for. See, the territorial contract amendment takes another 2 weeks. See, my lawyer is handling it. The foreclosure release. He reached into his coat and produced a folded document. See, set it on the table between them. Recorded this morning at the county seat. See, Mara looked at it. She didn't pick it up immediately. See, she looked at it the way you look at something you've been trying to get to for so long that the arrival of it feels almost suspicious. See, read it, he said, not impatiently, just clearly. See, she picked it up and read it. Twice. She wasn't a lawyer, but she'd read enough documents in the past 2 years, bank notices, land assessments. See, the original mortgage papers that Nathaniel had signed, and she'd countersigned, and then spent 2 years trying to service that she could follow the language. See, the mortgage was discharged. Full release. Her name. See, her property. She set it down, thank you, she said. See, he nodded. Sit down, she said. He did, which surprised her slightly. She'd expected him to have other places to be. See, he sat in the chair across from her and accepted the coffee she put in front of him. And they sat at the table together in the particular quiet of two people who have been adversaries and are no longer certain what to call what they are instead. See, can I ask you something? She said. You can ask me anything, he said. See, I might not answer. Fair, she said. When you came here the first time. See, with the bank draft, before you knew about Nathaniel and Hatcher's Gap. She looked at him steadily. See, if Edwin hadn't been here, if he hadn't been your father, see, would you have done it differently? Bram was quiet for a long moment. See, he looked at the coffee in front of him. He was, she'd come to see, a man who was capable of genuine honesty, but who never rushed to it, who needed to check the honesty against what he actually thought rather than what he wished he thought. See, no, he said finally. She nodded. She'd expected that. See, I would have waited for the bank, he said. Purchased the deed. See, cleared the property. Given you enough to start somewhere else and told myself it was generous. He paused. See, and believed it. That's the part that's the part I keep coming back to. See, I would have believed it. Most people believe the stories they tell about themselves, she said. See, yes, he said, they do. He looked up. What changed it wasn't the debt. See, you should know that. He said it carefully. The debt learning about Hatcher's Gap, about what your husband did that mattered. See, that's real. But that wasn't. He stopped. Started again. See, you opened your door, he said, in a storm, to a stranger. See, and you burned your last firewood, keeping him alive and fed him from stores. You couldn't replace and never once asked for anything in return, or made him feel the cost of it. See, that's what I kept, that's what I couldn't. His jaw worked. See, I have bought a great many things in my life, Mrs. See, Whitcomb. I have never been able to buy that, and I have never done it either. See, the kitchen was very quiet. You could, she said. See, not to flatter him, just because it was true. He looked at her. See, something in his face that was vulnerable in the way that faces only get when the person has stopped managing them. See, I don't know how, he said. It was possibly the most honest thing she'd heard from him. See, more honest than the apologies, more honest than the promises, because those had the shape of things he'd learned to give. See, this was something he was giving for the first time. See, you start small, she said. You do the thing that's in front of you. See, you don't decide in advance whether it's worth it or whether anyone will notice. She looked at the cedar box, at Nathaniel's papers inside it. See, that's all it ever is. He sat with that for a while. See, Edwin came in from the main room, moving better every day now, the last of the illness mostly gone from his face. See, he looked at the two of them at the table and did the thing he was good at, which was reading a room quickly and deciding not to disrupt it. See, he poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter. See, the foreman, Edwin said to Bram, conversationally. See, Hartley. Is that still his name, Hartley? Bram confirmed. See, is he really as unhappy as you're suggesting? Bram's mouth did something that was almost a smile. See, the first time she'd seen anything like it on his face. See, he told me this morning that if we hit bad granite above 200 feet, we'll need to bring in specialized equipment from Denver, and the delay could run to 5 months. See, and Edwin said, and I told him to find out what the equipment costs and wire Denver today. See, Edwin nodded slowly. Good. He called it financial insanity, Bram said. See, also good, Edwin said. Means he's paying attention. See, the almost smile came back, slightly more decided this time. See, it changed his face more than she'd expected, made him look younger, less armored, like a version of him that had existed before the decisions that had built the current one. See, Eli came in from the back room in his socks, apparently having given up entirely on the pretense that he wasn't listening. See, he looked at Bram. Are you going to come back, he asked. See, direct, the way he asked everything. Bram looked at the boy. See, at the specific, serious face of him. I expect I'll be nearby for a while, he said. See, while the construction is running. That's not what I asked, Eli said. See, Bram was quiet for a moment. He looked at Eli with something that might have been surprise and might have been respect hard to separate on his face. See, then yes, he said. I'll come back. Eli considered this. See, satisfied, he went back to the main room. Mara caught Edwin's eye across the kitchen. See, he had the expression of a man who has watched something happen that he'd begun to think he might not live to see, and who is doing his best not to make too much of it, because making too much of it would ruin it. See, she understood completely. She turned back to the stove and began putting together what she had for supper, which was better than it had been a week ago, not abundant. Not anything close to abundant, but enough. See, meat in the pot, flour enough for bread, coffee that didn't need to be rationed down to color. See, enough was, she'd always believed, what you built from. See, not plenty, not comfort, those were what you aimed for. See, but enough was where you started, and starting was everything. See, outside the wind moved across the valley and touched the cottonwood and moved on, and Nathaniel's grave rested in the cold earth beneath the branches, and the granite mountains stood where they'd always stood. See, patient and indifferent to human concerns, except where humans insisted on concerning them. See, and in a small kitchen in a cabin a dead man had built with his own hands, his wife stood at the stove and cooked supper, while 2 Mercer-men sat at the table and talked about engineering. See, and a 9-year-old boy lay on the floor in the next room, pretending to read and actually listening to everything, and the fire burned low and steady against the January cold, and the worst of it, the specific, see, shapeless, unresolvable worst of it was behind them. See, what came next would be its own kind of hard, but the kind of hard that has a shape that has Ford in it was a different animal entirely from the kind that didn't. See, Mara added wood to the fire and listened to the voices at her table and thought, for the first time in 26 months, about next year. See, the territorial contract amendment came through on a Wednesday, which was an ordinary enough day for something that changed everything. See, Mara read it at the kitchen table with Edwin sitting across from her and Eli doing his letters on the floor beside the stove, and she read it the same way she'd read the mortgage release, twice, methodically. See, with the particular attention she'd developed over 2 years of reading documents that had the power to take things from her. See, this one was different. This one gave. The language was formal and dense in the way legal language always was, but the substance was clear enough. See, the revised route specifications. The land covenant protecting Nathaniel's grave and the surrounding 300 yards. See, the property boundary clarifications. See, and at the bottom, Bram's signature in the same deliberate hand she'd seen on the mortgage release, not a flashy signature, not that kind that announces itself. Just a clear and legible name that said, without theater, see, that this person intended to be held to what they'd signed. See, she set it down. Edwin looked at her face. Well? See, it's what he said it would be, she said. He nodded once. See, he'd known it would be. She'd known it would be. See, but there was still a difference between knowing and seeing it, written, signed, and recorded the difference between a promise and a fact, which was not always as large as people thought, but was never zero. See, she put the document in the cedar box with Nathaniel's papers. See, it belonged there, she felt. With everything else that had accumulated in that box over the years, the record of a life, the evidence that a person had moved through the world and left marks that lasted. See, Bram arrived that evening with Hartley, his chief engineer, who was a compact, weathered man in his 50s, with the expression of someone who had been professionally unhappy for a long time and had organized his entire personality around it. See, he shook Mara's hand with the perfunctory grip of a man performing courtesy under protest and spread a map on her kitchen table without being invited to do so, which told her most of what she needed to know about him. See, the problem, see, Hartley said, see, pointing at the map, is here. See, and here he tapped 2 points on the granite ridge. See, we've got a seam of harder rock running diagonally through the approach. See, that changes our blast pattern, which changes our timeline, which changes... He glanced up at Bram. See, everything is what it changes. What's the revised timeline? Bram asked. See, best case, 4 months to get through the ridge cleanly enough to lay track. See, worst case, 6. Hartley sat back. And that's assuming the equipment from Denver arrives when the wire says it will, which in my experience it... See, what do you need to make it 4, Bram said. Hartley looked at him. See, more men. Better pay to keep them through the winter blasting. See, and you stop second-guessing the blast sequence from your end of the telegraph. See, Mara watched Bram take that. He didn't react the way she'd expected, no pushback, no assertion of authority. See, he just said, done. Hartley blinked. He'd clearly expected a negotiation. See, the absence of one seemed to throw his internal calculations. See, right, Hartley said after a pause. Well then, he began rolling up the map. See, 4 months. See, he glanced at Mara, then at the room, then at Bram with an expression that had something almost human in it, the expression of a man who has been professionally unhappy for a long time encountering a situation that doesn't fit his categories. See, the route around the valley, he said gruffly, is actually better in one respect. See, fewer river crossings on the eastern descent. I didn't put that in my original assessment because you'd made your decision and He stopped. See, it's a better route in one respect, see, he said again firmly. See, and left it there. See, he shook Mara's hand again on his way out, and this time the grip was different, less perfunctory, more considered. See, he said nothing more. He was not a man who made speeches. See, but she understood the handshake. Bram stayed after Hartley rode back to camp. See, they sat by the fire, the three of them, Mara, Bram, Edwin, and Eli, fell asleep on the floor again, in his particular boneless way, and outside the wind was picking up from the north again, but with less menace than the wind of a month ago. See, February wind, still cold, still serious, but with a different character. See, the character of something ending rather than something arriving. See, he'll do it right, Edwin said about Hartley. He always does things right, Bram said. See, he just needed to stop fighting the premise. That's generally how it goes, Edwin said. See, he looked at his son. Once people stop fighting the premise. See, Bram looked at his father for a moment, then at the fire. See, you could have told me any of this, he said, years ago. See, the story about the passage, about Whitcomb. You could have, see, and you'd have thought what? Edwin said. That some anonymous cavalry officer deserved your gratitude, that you owed a man you'd never met a consideration you'd have written a check for and moved on. He shook his head. See, you needed to meet her. You needed to see it for yourself. See, a story handed to you is information. A thing you discover is different. See, Bram was quiet for a while. The fire settled, and Mara added another piece of wood she'd stopped being careful about it, which was its own kind of relief, and the warmth spread outward, and the wind pushed at the shutters and found them solid. See, I've been thinking, Bram said, about the name. See, Mara looked at him. The passage through the ridge, he said. See, once it's built, the route needs a name. Every passage on the line has one. See, survey designation, then a permanent name. He looked at her steadily. See, I'd like to name it after your husband, Whitcomb Pass. See, officially. See, on the territorial survey. See, on the maps. See, on the station marker. See, he paused. See, if you'd consent to it. The room was very quiet. See, she looked at him for a long moment. She was thinking about Nathaniel, about his specific discomfort with recognition, his genuine puzzlement at the idea that what he'd done at Hatcher's Gap was anything worth naming. See, about the man who had said always that he just did what was in front of him. See, she thought that Nathaniel would be embarrassed by this. See, she thought also that embarrassed was a feeling for the living, and that the dead had no opinions about what the living did with their names. See, and that Eli was 9 years old and would grow up carrying his father's name into a world that didn't yet know it, and that a name on a map was something a boy could point to. See, yes, she said, I consent to it. Bram nodded. He didn't make a production of it. See, just nodded, the way he did things he meant. Edwin, from his chair, said nothing. See, he looked at the fire with an expression that she'd learned by now was his version of full feeling when something was too large for his face to manage cleanly. He went very still and looked at the fire and let it be still with him. See, Eli stirred on the floor, didn't wake, turned over and pulled his blanket tighter and went back under, his face slack and peaceful in the firelight, one hand tucked under his cheek. See, Mara looked at her son and thought, you'll know your father's name in stone and on maps and in this house, and in the stories Edwin will tell you, which are true. See, and in the things I'll teach you about what a person does when the doing costs them something. See, that's not nothing. That's not small. She looked back at Bram. See, what made you come yourself, she said, that first night. See, you could have sent men. He looked at her. She'd asked him this before in different forms. See, he'd deflected before. This time he didn't. My father hadn't come home, he said simply. See, when men I send bring news about my father, I find out what the news is and then I decide what to do. See, when he doesn't come home, he stopped. Something shifted in his face. See, I ride myself. You were worried, she said. I'm always worried about him, he said. See, I just don't. He made a small, frustrated gesture. See, I don't know how to talk about it. With him. He knows and I know and another stop. See, we're not good at the middle part. The part between knowing and saying. See, Edwin said. See, from his chair. See, without looking away from the fire. See, we're getting better. See, something in Bram's face went briefly, completely unguarded. See, the way a door opens before you mean it to. Then it closed again, but slowly, and what it closed on was different from what had been there before, softer at the edges. See, reorganized. Yes, Bram said, we are. That was the last night Bram stayed at the cabin that particular winter. See, he came back through over the following weeks, sometimes briefly, sometimes long enough for supper, and each time the shape of him in the kitchen was slightly more familiar and slightly less strange. See, he learned to knock the way Edwin had taught Eli. He learned that Eli would ask him direct questions and expected direct answers. See, he learned that Mara did not require a conversation to fill every silence, and that the silences in that cabin were not uncomfortable ones. See, he sent what he said he'd send. The supplies continued through February. See, the legal documentation arrived complete and recorded. See, he did not call them gifts. He did not ask for gratitude, which she respected, because the asking for gratitude turns a good act into a transaction, and he seemed, slowly, to be learning the difference. See, Hartley began blasting through the granite ridge the third week of February. See, the sound of it reached the cabin like distant thunder, a deep, concussive thud that traveled through the earth as much as through the air. See, setting the cups vibrating slightly in their hooks and sending the horses in the small pasture into brief agitation before they settled again. See, the first time it happened, Eli shot upright from his chair and looked at his mother with wide eyes. See, they're blasting, she said. He listened to the next one roll through. See, then he went back to his letters, though he tracked each subsequent detonation with the focused attention of a boy cataloging data. See, how far away is the ridge, he asked that evening. See, maybe 2 miles, she said. I can feel at my feet when it goes off, he said. See, I know, she said. That's the railroad going around us, he said. See, slowly, working out what he thought about it. Yes. See, he was quiet for a moment. Pa would have thought that was something, he said finally. See, Mara looked at him, at the face that was so much his father's and so entirely its own. See, he would have, she said. Eli nodded, satisfied with this, and went back to his letters. See, spring arrived the way it always arrived in Wyoming, not gracefully, not all at once, but in arguments. See, a week of thaw, then a hard frost that set everything back, then sun so warm it seemed like an apology, then one last snowstorm that nobody needed but which arrived anyway, because weather in that country did not consult human preferences. See, by late March the arguments were most resolved in spring's favor, and by April the valley was running with snowmelt, and the lower pasture had gone that specific bright green that only happened in the first weeks after the ground softened. See, Mara planted. She planted with the same focused efficiency she'd brought to everything else over the past 2 years, but with a forward-lookingness that had been missing before. See, not just what would survive the summer, what she wanted. See, what she wanted the garden to be. She put in the practical things first, the things you needed, and then she went back and put in the things Nathaniel had always said they'd plant someday when they had more time and more money. See, the climbing roses along the south fence, the herb bed along the kitchen wall. See, the apple trees, 2 of them, small and optimistic at the far end of the garden where they'd have room to grow into something in 5 or 6 years. See, Eli helped with the trees, serious about the depth of the holes, having decided that this was an engineering problem and therefore within his area of interest. See, he measured twice with a length of cord before digging once. See, Nathaniel's habit. She didn't say anything about it. See, she just watched him apply his father's precision to his father's soil and thought about what it meant for something to continue through a person without them knowing they were carrying it. See, Edwin came back in May. He arrived the way he'd arrived the first time unexpectedly, though this time with warning and with a horse that was still under him. See, he came through the south road in the early afternoon, with saddlebags and a crate roped to the pack horse behind him, and Eli saw him from the fence line and ran. See, Mara watched her son run toward the old man and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't known was tight. See, Edwin dismounted before Eli reached him, which took more careful effort than it once had. He was moving slower than he had in the winter, and she noted that, filed it away, decided she would feed him well and not say anything about it. See, he caught Eli in a one-armed hug that Eli accepted with the embarrassed tolerance of a boy who'd decided he was too old for embraces but was making exceptions. See, you're taller, Edwin said. I grew an inch since February, Eli said. See, Ma measured me on the doorframe. An inch is considerable, Edwin said seriously. See, I know, Eli said. I'm going to be tall. Your father was tall, Edwin said. See, I know, Eli said again. He'd found a way over the winter to say those 3 words I know that carried both the weight of loss and the solidity of possession. See, he knew. He knew who his father had been and what he'd done and whose grave was under the cottonwood and whose name was going on the ridge pass, and the knowing was not a wound anymore. See, it was the ground under his feet. See, Edwin brought the crate inside, which turned out to contain coffee, real coffee. Not the weakened kind and sugar and a bolt of blue cloth that Mara stood looking at for a full 10 seconds before she understood what it was for. See, which was nothing in particular, just something someone had wanted her to have, because the winter had been hard, and the spring deserved better than what she currently had to wear to town. See, she thanked him without making it complicated. He received the thanks the same way. See, they sat on the porch that afternoon. The 3 of them, because the afternoon was warm enough, and the view from the porch was the valley going green and the mountains beyond it still white at their peaks, and across the eastern ridge you could hear. See, just barely, the sound of work not blasting anymore. The blasting phase was mostly done, but the steady mechanical industry of a railroad being built, iron on stone, the rhythm of men driving stakes and laying grade. See, he named it, Edwin said. Not a question. The paperwork came through last month, Mara said. See, Whitcomb Pass. It'll be on the survey maps and on the station marker when they build one. See, Edwin looked at the ridge. He was quiet for a while. See, Nathaniel would have protested, he said. He would have protested at length, Mara agreed. See, he would have said it wasn't necessary, and that plenty of men did what he did, and that his name on a map didn't mean anything. See, he'd have been wrong, Edwin said. He was wrong about that kind of thing fairly regularly, she said. See, he was a good man with a significant blind spot about his own value. See, Edwin smiled at that. Most good men have that blind spot. See, the ones who don't, who know exactly how valuable they are, they tend to make worse decisions about how to spend themselves. See, Mara thought about that, about Bram, who had known exactly how valuable he was and spent himself accordingly for 20 years. See, about Nathaniel, who had never quite believed it and spent himself anyway. See, about Edwin, who had learned, at a cost that included 2 fingers and 30 years of a complicated debt, that what you survive changes you whether you account for it or not. See, how is he, she asked. She didn't need to say which he. See, better, Edwin said. Different. He's talking more. See, to me, I mean. Not just business conversation. Actual, he paused. See, he came to visit me last month for 3 days, and we didn't talk about a single contract for 2 of them. He sounded almost wonderstruck at this, like a man describing a rare weather event. See, we talked about his mother, about things I should have said to him when he was young. See, he stopped, he's figuring out how to want things that aren't the railroad. See, that's good, Mara said. It's new, Edwin said. New is uncomfortable before it gets good. He glanced at her. See, you know something about that. She did. The blasting stopped entirely in late May, which meant the cutting through the granite was complete and the grade work had begun. See, the sound of the construction changed less concussive, more mechanical, more steady, like the valley had settled into tolerating it. See, Mara walked to the eastern pasture fence one morning in early June and stood looking at the ridge, at the notch that had been carved through it by several months of hard work and a considerable amount of Bram Mercer's money. See, and she thought about the fact that where there had been solid mountain, there was now passage, and that on the other side of that passage lay the rest of the territory. See, and that her valley was no longer at the end of things, but adjacent to the middle of them. See, she wasn't entirely sure how she felt about that. Progress was a real thing. See, she'd never been a person who thought otherwise, who believed the world should stay the way it was for the comfort of the people who'd arranged themselves inside it. See, the railroad would bring trade, and it would bring strangers, and it would change the shape of the country in ways that couldn't all be predicted. See, and some of those changes would be good, and some wouldn't, and the only way to find out which was to live through them. See, but the valley was still her valley. That hadn't changed. See, Nathaniel's grave was still under the cottonwood, and the cottonwood was still growing, and the apple trees were small but rooted, and the cabin stood where it had always stood, and her name was on the land, and that was the part she'd fought for. See, she went back to her garden. Bram came in June with a man she didn't recognize introduced as his lawyer, Aldous, a thin, careful man who shook hands like he was conserving energy. See, they sat at the kitchen table, and Aldous laid out a document and walked her through it, and it was the transportation charter free passage on Bram's railroad in perpetuity for Mara and her descendants, formally recorded and legally binding. See, in perpetuity, she said. Every line I build, for as long as my company operates, Bram said. See, you and your family travel free. She looked at him. See. It's practical, he said, and she recognized in that the echo of the thing she'd told him months ago. This is not charity. This is what it is. And she understood that he was returning the frame she'd given him, which meant he'd been carrying it. See, you're adjacent to the line now. Commerce. Supplies. See, Eli's schooling. When he's old enough for the academy in Cheyenne. He paused. See, it costs me almost nothing. It means considerably more to you. See, practical. She looked at Aldous, who confirmed with a small nod that the document was as stated, complete, binding, no hidden terms. See, she signed it. Aldous blotted it. Bram watched without expression, but with that particular stillness she'd come to read as his version of feeling something he didn't plan to discuss. See, after Aldous left, she made coffee, and they sat at the table the way they'd sat at it a dozen times now. See, in the particular informality of people who'd moved past strangers and through adversaries and arrived at something that didn't have a clean name. See, there's something else, Bram said. She waited. See, he reached into his coat. She'd noticed he always carried things in his coat, as if he mistrusted tables and surfaces, preferred to keep things on his person until they needed to be real, and produced a small package wrapped in burlap. See, he set it on the table between them. Open it, he said. See, she unwrapped it. Inside was a brass compass, old but well-maintained, the kind that had been used rather than displayed. See, the needle moved cleanly when she tilted it, settling with confidence. See, on the back was an engraving, small and precise, a survey mark, and beside it 3 letters that she recognized as Bram's father's initials. See, that was Edwin, she said. He wanted Eli to have it, Bram said. See, he said a boy who plans to survey mountains should have a compass that has already been to some. See, Mara turned the compass over in her hands. She thought about a young Eli growing into this gift, the weight of it, the practicality of it, the particular message in it that Edwin had chosen very deliberately. Not a symbol, not a trophy, but a tool. See, something for use. He's going to love it, she said. See, I know, Bram said. And then he told me, when he gave it to me to bring here, that it was the most useful thing he owned, and that's why he wanted Eli to have it, rather than some sentimental keepsake. He paused. See, my father, whatever his other qualities, has always understood the difference between things that are meaningful and things that are useful, and has always preferred when something manages to be both. See, that's a good quality, Mara said. He gets it from somewhere, Bram said. See, she looked at him. His father, he said. Then, with the deliberate quality of someone choosing honesty over comfort, his father, who was better at showing him what to be than he was at being there to show it. See, those aren't the same thing, and they don't balance. See, but they're what I have to work with. Mara set the compass down on the table carefully. See, you're hard on yourself, she said. I'm accurate about myself, he said. See, there's a difference. Sometimes, she said. And sometimes they're the same thing wearing different hats. See, something in his face shifted that near smile again, the one that changed his whole aspect when it arrived. See, you sound like him, he said. Like Nathaniel from what my father says. See, Edwin says he had a way of cutting to the actual point of a thing without making you feel small for having missed it. See, Mara was quiet for a moment. She hadn't expected that. See, she hadn't expected to hear Nathaniel described to her by someone who'd never met him, through the eyes of someone who'd loved him, and find that the description was recognizable. See, true, that what Edwin had seen in Nathaniel and was seeing in her were connected the way all things are connected that live long enough together in one house, one life. See, he was better at it than I am, she said. I make people feel small sometimes. See, I don't mean to. I just don't always have patience for the long way around. See, no, Bram agreed. A pause, it's effective. See, it makes enemies, she said. It also makes things happen, he said. See, those aren't always different. Eli came in from the garden with dirt on his hands and a look of focused satisfaction. See, he stopped when he saw Bram, reassessed, and came to the table. See, is that for me? He said, looking at the compass. See, Mara handed it to him. From Edwin, she said, his own compass. See, he said a surveyor should have one that's already been to the mountains. See, Eli took it with both hands. He turned it over. He read the engraving. See, he tilted it and watched the needle settle. He stood there for a long moment with the compass in his hands, very still, and Mara watched him feel the weight of it, not just the physical weight, but the other kind. See, the kind that comes when someone gives you something they actually valued, and the giving means they valued you enough to part with it. See, I'll take care of it, Eli said quietly. To no one in particular, or to Edwin in absentia, which was the same thing. See, I know you will, Bram said. Eli looked at him. Will you tell him I said thank you? When you see him. See, I'll tell him, Bram said. Eli nodded once, pocketed the compass with care, and went to wash his hands. See, his priorities, as ever, see, were clear and practical. See, he'd felt the moment fully. See, said what needed saying. See, and moved on. See, Nathaniel's boy. The station marker went up in August. See, Mara heard about it from the railroad construction foreman's assistant, who rode out with a note from Bram saying that the marker had been set, and that if she wished to come see it before the formal survey completion, she was welcome. See, she and Eli went the following morning. The marker was at the near end of the passage through the granite ridge, a heavy iron post, set in concrete, with a cast plate fixed to its face. See, they rode up to it in the early morning light, and Eli pulled his horse alongside it and reached out and touched the letters with his fingertips the way he'd touched things before that he needed to make real. See, Whitcomb Pass. The name in capital letters, the survey elevation beneath it, the Mercer Railroad Company marked below that. See, Eli read it twice. He sat on his horse in the morning light, see, reading his father's name on an iron marker at the entrance to a mountain passage that had been blasted through solid granite so that his father's grave could remain where it had always been, and he did not say anything for a long time. See, Mara sat beside him and said nothing either. Then Eli said he'd have hated this. See, absolutely, she agreed. He'd have said it was unnecessary. See, he'd have gone red, she said, from his ears down. See, he did that when he was embarrassed. Eli smiled at that, a real smile, wide and sudden, the smile of a boy accessing a memory he'd feared might fade. See, I remember that, he said. I remember his ears going red. See, he had very expressive ears, Mara said. Eli laughed. See, an actual laugh, bright and clean in the morning air, bouncing off the granite walls of the pass and coming back to them. See, she let herself laugh too, not because it was funny exactly, but because the laughter and the grief were living in the same place in her chest and had been for a long time, and there was no reason to keep them separate anymore. See, Nathaniel, with his red ears and his ruined coffee and his way of coming back for the last man in the passage, because leaving was something he couldn't do. That man deserved laughter at his memory as much as he deserved. See, tears, because he'd been a full person, not a monument. See, she was glad, suddenly and completely, that the name on the marker was his. See, that it would be on maps. See, that people passing through this notch in the granite decades from now would say the name without knowing the story, and the name would persist regardless, the way names do, past the comprehension of most of the mouths that form them. See, that was enough. That was more than enough. Edwin came back in September, his last visit of that year, and he came with something new in his face that she noticed immediately, a tiredness that wasn't recent. See, the kind that had been accumulating for a while and was no longer fully hiding itself. See, he was still Edwin, still sharp, still observant, still able to stop Eli mid-sentence with a single dry remark and make the boy burst out laughing. See, but he moved carefully now, the way people move when they've started rationing something. See, she fed him well and didn't say anything about it. See, he sat with Eli for an entire afternoon, the two of them at the kitchen table with the brass compass between them, and a surveying manual Bram had sent that Eli had been working through with the methodical dedication of a boy who'd found his north. See, Edwin walked him through the compass readings, through how to triangulate position from fixed landmarks, through how surveyors handled the problem of a horizon that didn't match your calculation. See, Eli listened the way he listened to things that mattered completely, without fidgeting, asking questions that were always specific than you expected from a 10-year-old. See, Mara worked in the kitchen and listened to them and understood that she was watching something be passed forward. See, not just knowledge, though it was that too, but a particular way of attending to the world. See, of looking at a landscape and seeing not only what it was, but what it could become, and what it would cost, and what it was worth, and how you moved through it honestly. See, before Edwin left that September, he found her on the porch in the evening after Eli had gone to bed. See, they sat in the two chairs, the good ones she'd bought in May, with the first money she'd had to spend on something that wasn't necessary, just wanted. See, and Nathaniel's old chair, which was still terrible and still standing, and watched the valley go dark, from east to west, the mountains holding the last light after everything else had given it up. See, he's going to be fine, Edwin said. He meant Eli. See, I know, she said. And you, he said. She looked at him. See, you were fine before any of this, he said. I want you to know I know that. See, you didn't need us. You would have found a way through. See, she thought about that. About the flour barrel and the bank notice and the days she'd sat at the table doing arithmetic that didn't add up to any answer except disaster. See, I'm not sure that's true, she said honestly. I am, Edwin said. See, you might have lost the farm. You might have had to start over somewhere else with your boy, and nothing but the cedar box and his father's name. See, and you would have. He looked at her. That's not nothing. See, most people don't have that, the willingness to just keep going regardless. See, she looked at the valley, at the shape of it in the dusk, the lower pasture, the garden, the cottonwood standing dark against the fading sky, and under it, the pale granite of Nathaniel's marker catching the last of the light. See, he taught me that, she said. Nathaniel, not by saying it. See, by doing it. I watched him keep going for 6 years in circumstances that would have broken other men and never once call it courage because he didn't think it was. See, he thought it was just what you did. She paused. See, I got that from him. I carried it forward because he left it where I could find it. See, Edwin was quiet for a while. That's what people leave, he said finally. See, the good ones. Not money, not property. Things you can carry forward. He looked at his hands in his lap, the 2 fingers that weren't there, the ones that had come home from Hatcher's Gap missing. See, he looked at them with neither grief nor drama, just acknowledgement. See, he left it in you, you've put it in Eli. Eli will put it somewhere else. See, that's how it actually works. They sat with that for a while. See, the sky finished darkening. The stars came out one at a time, and then all at once, the way they do in country, without much other light to compete with sudden and extravagant, spread across the dark from one mountain ridge to the other. See, you'll come back in spring, Mara said. I expect so, Edwin said. See, she looked at him, at the tiredness in his face that she'd been not mentioning all week. See, you'll let Bram know if you need anything. He looked at her sideways. See, I know what you told me, she said. See, he made a sound that was half protest, half acceptance. See, he already knows, he said. He comes more often now. See, we eat dinner together most weeks, we talk. He paused. See, real talking. Good, she said. He wants to know everything, Edwin said. See, about the campaigns, about his mother. Things I should have told him when he was 12 that I told myself he was too young for and then told myself he was too busy for and eventually just didn't tell him. He stopped. See, he's not angry about it. That's the part I didn't expect. See, I thought when we finally got there he'd be angry and I'd deserve it. See, he shook his head slightly. He's just hungry for it. See, the way people are hungry for things they've been without a long time. See, Mara thought about a 12-year-old boy building walls around a grief his father didn't know how to share with him. See, about the 40-year-old man those walls had produced, arriving at her door with a bank draft and a surveyor's map and the absolute confidence of someone who'd long since decided that everything had a price and the thing to do was name it. See, she thought about him standing beside Nathaniel's grave with his hand on the stone and his voice going young around the edges. See, it's not too late, she said. No, Edwin agreed. See, it's not too late. He sounded like he was still getting used to believing that. See, that's the thing nobody told me about getting old. See, you think by a certain point it must be too late for the things you put off. See, and then it turns out it mostly isn't. See, you have to want it enough to look stupid trying, but mostly it isn't. See, she sat with that for a while. The last train of the season came through Whitcomb Pass in October, and Mara and Eli rode out to the ridge and watched it from the high point above the cut. The first train, the actual first one. See, the locomotive and its string of cars threading through the granite passage that had taken 5 months and a great deal of money, and one woman's refusal to be managed into doing the sensible thing. See, it was loud. Eli had not been near a locomotive before, and the sound of it was larger than he'd been prepared for that deep mechanical thunder, the hiss of the steam, the iron-on-iron rhythm of wheels on the new track. See, he stood beside his horse on the overlook and watched it come through with his jaw set and his eyes tracking every part of it, the focused expression of a boy who was both impressed and already figuring out how it worked. See, the locomotive cleared the far end of the pass and began its descent toward the eastern valley, and as it did it let out a long blast of steam, whether intentional or just mechanical. See, she couldn't say that rose white against the blue sky and dissipated slowly in the cold October air. See, Eli turned to look at her. His face was complicated in the way that the faces of children are complicated when they're feeling something they don't yet have the vocabulary for. See, that went past Pa's name, he said. It did, she said. See, every train that comes through here is going to go past Pa's name, he said. See, everyone, she said. He turned back to watch the last cars disappear around the bend below the pass. See, he was quiet for a long time. That's good, he said finally. See, simple, declarative, the judgment of a 10-year-old who'd thought it through and arrived at a conclusion and saw no reason to complicate it. See, yes, Mara said, it is. She looked at the pass. See, at the notch cut through the granite, clean and definitive, the iron rails catching light as they curved through and out of sight. See, she thought about what Edwin had said, that what people leave is not property or money, but things you can carry forward. See, she thought about a young lieutenant going back into a frozen passage for the last man, because leaving wasn't something he was built for. See, she thought about a storm and a lamp in a window, and a stranger on his knees in the snow, and about the arithmetic of small decisions how you never know. See, when you open a door or save a portion, or burn your last firewood for a stranger, what equation you're participating in. See, you just do the thing in front of you. Nathaniel's name was on the pass. See, Edwin would come back in spring. Eli had a brass compass with a good needle and a surveying manual and a hunger for the mathematics of the land that was going to take him places she couldn't yet see. See, the farm was hers, clean and free, and the apple trees were in the ground, and in 5 years they'd bear fruit. And the valley was still green in the low places where the snowmelt ran, and the cottonwood was still standing. See, she was 32 years old, and she had been a widow for 2 years and 8 months, and she was still here, in the house her husband built, on the land they'd chosen together, and the worst of it was behind her. See, and the rest of it, whatever shape it took, was hers to build. See, she gathered her reins. "Come on," she said to Eli. See, "we have work before dark." He gathered his own reins with the competence of a boy who'd learned horses properly, checked the compass once in his breast pocket the way she'd seen him check it every time he mounted up. See, as if confirming something he already knew but liked to be sure of, and turned his horse toward home. See, they rode back down through the autumn valley side by side, and the mountains stood around them, and the wind came off the peaks clean and cold, and carrying the smell of something that was not yet winter, but was thinking about it. And behind them, see, carved into the granite and named for a man who would have hated the attention, the pass was open. See, it had always been, in the end, the simplest kind of thing. See, someone had gone back, and because of that, everything else had been possible.